When a man lies to save a stranger, he doesn't just risk his life, he surrenders his solitude forever. In the unforgiving landscape of the American frontier where survival demands silence and trust is a luxury no one can afford, a hardened rancher made a choice that would shatter everything he'd built. He ordered a bride with one rule: no complications. But the woman who arrived carried secrets darker than the Wyoming night, and enemies powerful enough to burn his world to ash. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you to Holt's Crossing. The wind that carved through Holt's Crossing didn't whisper, it accused. It stripped paint from wood, scoured skin raw, and reminded every soul foolish enough to settle there that the land owed them nothing. The town itself was less a community than a collection of stubborn refusals to die. A general store with boards across two windows, a saloon that doubled as a courthouse, a livery stable, and a scattering of buildings that looked ready to collapse into dust at the next good storm. Caleb Rourke's ranch sat 3 miles outside town, a deliberate distance, close enough to sell cattle and buy supplies, far enough that no one asked questions. The ranch house was built from Wyoming pine and silence, 2 stories of weathered gray wood that had absorbed 15 years of Caleb's solitude. The barn stood solid, the fences held, and the land stretched out in rolling hills of sage and scrub grass that turned gold under the summer sun. It was functional, austere, exactly what a man needed when he'd decided that feeling anything was too expensive. Caleb stood on his porch that September morning, coffee cooling in his tin cup, watching the road. The stagecoach wasn't due for another hour, but he'd learned long ago that waiting was easier than being caught unprepared. At 37, he'd settled into the rhythm of his life the way stone settles into riverbeds, permanent, immovable, shaped by forces he no longer fought against. He was a tall man, lean in the way that came from work rather than hunger, with dark hair showing gray at the temples, and a face that the sun had carved into hard angles. His eyes were the color of winter sky, pale blue, cold, seeing everything and revealing nothing. He wore work clothes, denim worn soft, a cotton shirt faded to no particular color, boots that had been resoled twice. Everything about him said the same thing: I am here to survive, not to impress. The advertisement had been Marcus Webb's idea. Marcus ran the general store and appointed himself the town's unofficial matchmaker, marriage counselor, and meddler-in-chief. He'd cornered Caleb 6 months earlier while Caleb was buying rope and flour. "You're going to die alone out there," Marcus had said, not unkindly. He was a round man with a gray beard and the persistent optimism of someone who'd never experienced real tragedy. "House that big, land that good. It's a waste, Caleb. You need help. You need company." "I need rope and flour." "You need a wife." Caleb had given him the look that usually ended conversations: flat, final, a door closing. But Marcus had been ready. "Not talking about love, if that's what's got your hackles up. Talking about sense. Practical arrangement. Woman to manage the house, help with accounts, maybe the kitchen garden. You provide security, stability. It's business, Caleb, clean business." "No. There are agencies, respectable ones. Women looking for exactly this kind of situation. Honest work, fair treatment, no romantic foolishness. You write down what you need, they find someone suitable. Simple as ordering tools from a catalog." Caleb had walked out, but the seed was planted. 3 weeks later, alone in a house that echoed with emptiness, staring at account books he'd been neglecting and meals he couldn't be bothered to cook properly, he'd admitted Marcus was right. Not about company. He didn't need company, but about practicality. The ranch was profitable, but inefficient. He was losing money on disorganization, wasting time on tasks someone else could handle better. He could hire help, or he could solve multiple problems at once. The letter he'd written to the Madison Square matrimonial agency had been blunt to the point of rudeness: rancher, Wyoming territory. Seeking practical woman for household management and partnership. Not seeking beauty, charm, or romance. Require competence, self-sufficiency, and discretion. Will provide separate quarters initially, fair treatment, financial security. No drinkers, no complainers, no expectations beyond mutual benefit. Reply if serious. He'd expected no responses. He'd received 7. 6 had been exactly what he'd feared: desperate women reading hope into his words, asking about his interests and his heart, including daguerreotypes that made him uncomfortable. He'd burned those letters. The seventh had been different. Mr. Rourke, your requirements are clear and acceptable. I seek security and autonomy, not affection. I am educated, healthy, skilled in household management and basic accounting. I do not drink, complain, or carry romantic illusions. I will earn my place. If you are sincere in your offer, I will arrive on the September 18th stage. Evos. No photograph, no pleading, no questions about his favorite color or whether he liked music. Just fact. Meeting. Fact. Need. Meeting. Need. He'd written back with one word. Agreed. That had been 6 weeks ago. Now draining the last of his coffee, Caleb tried to picture what would step off that stagecoach. Someone plain, probably, older maybe, with the hard-worn look of a woman who'd run out of options. That was fine. Better than fine. It meant no complications, no misunderstandings. She'd understand this was a transaction. She'd do her work, he'd do his, and they'd coexist in the careful distance he'd perfected. The sound of hoofbeats and creaking wood cut through his thoughts. The stagecoach was early. Caleb set down his cup and walked toward the road, measuring his pace. Not eager, not reluctant, just steady, neutral. The way he approached everything now. The coach was a battered Concord, red paint faded to rust, pulled by 6 horses that looked as tired as the driver. It lurched to a stop in a cloud of dust, and the driver, a grizzled man named Hutchins, who'd been running this route for 20 years, leaned down from his perch. "Rourke, got your package." Caleb's jaw tightened at the word, but he said nothing. Hutchins meant no offense. This was just how men talked about mail-order brides. Cargo, freight, something ordered and delivered. The coach door opened. What emerged was not what Caleb had prepared for. She was young, late 20s, maybe 30, tall, nearly 5'8", with a straight-back posture that didn't come from corseting but from something deeper, something intrinsic. She wore a traveling dress of dark blue wool, practical but well-made, with no ornament except a simple watch pinned to her bodice. Her hair was dark brown, almost black, pulled back in a severe knot that revealed a face of sharp, clean angles, high cheekbones, a straight nose, a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled but might be devastating if it did. But it was her eyes that stopped him. They were dark gray, almost colorless in the bright sun, and they swept across the landscape with the focused attention of someone conducting a survey. She looked at the barn, the house, the fences, the water trough, the tree line, cataloging, assessing, measuring. When her gaze finally reached him, it didn't soften or warm. It simply registered him, the way you'd note a fence post or a door hinge. "Mr. Rourke." Her voice was lower than he'd expected, calm and absolutely steady. "Miss Voss?" She moved to the back of the coach where Hutchins was wrestling down 2 bags, one large leather trunk and one smaller canvas bag that she immediately took from him, holding it close. Protective. "That everything?" Caleb asked. "Yes." He picked up the trunk, heavier than he'd expected, and started toward the house. After a moment, he heard her footsteps behind him. Steady, not hurrying to catch up, not lagging behind, exactly matching his pace. They crossed the yard in silence. Caleb was aware of her gaze still moving, still cataloging. She was seeing everything. The chicken coop he'd built last spring, the garden plot that had gone to weeds, the workshop with its door slightly ajar. He found himself oddly conscious of these details, seeing them through her eyes. Evidence of a man living alone. Evidence of things neglected. He led her onto the porch and through the front door into the main room. The house had been built with family in mind. His family, the one he'd planned 15 years ago. The main floor held a large living area with a stone fireplace, a dining space with a table that could seat 8, and a kitchen that opened to a back porch. Stairs led to the second floor where 4 bedrooms waited, mostly empty. The whole place was clean but Spartan, functional, like everything else in his life. Caleb set the trunk down and turned to face her. She was standing in the center of the room, that canvas bag still clutched in one hand, her eyes making another of those sweeping assessments. He waited for the usual reactions. Disappointment at the plainness, nervousness at the isolation, or the forced brightness of someone trying to seem pleased. He'd braced for all of it. Instead, she nodded once. "It's well built." Not a compliment, an observation. "Your room's upstairs," he said. First door on the left. There's a washstand and basin. Outhouse is back of the property, but there's a chamber pot in the room. I'll get water heating if you want a bath. That would be acceptable. Acceptable, not thank you or that would be wonderful. Just acceptable. Kitchen's through there, he gestured. I usually eat at 6 in the morning, noon, and 6 at night. Nothing fancy. If you need to change that, the schedule is fine. There's a root cellar and a smokehouse. Stores are good for another 2 months. After that, we'll need to go into town for supplies. How often do you go to town? Once a month, sometimes less. Again, that single nod. I'll need to see your account books. Caleb blinked. What? Your accounts? You mentioned in your letter that you needed help with household management. That includes finances. I'll need to see your records to understand the current system. It was reasonable. It was exactly what he'd hired her for. But something about the directness, the assumption of authority in her voice, caught him off balance. They're in the office. Desk in the corner there. He pointed to a small room visible through an open door. But you just got here. Don't you want to rest, settle in? I prefer to be useful. She said it simply, without pride or defiance. Just stating a fact. She'd prefer to be useful. For the first time in the entire exchange, something flickered across her face. Not quite emotion, but a brief tension around her eyes. As if usefulness was the only currency she trusted. All right, Caleb said slowly. I'll get that water heating. You can look at the books after you've cleaned up. Thank you. She picked up her trunk, hefted it with both hands like she'd done this many times before, and started up the stairs. Caleb watched her go, noting the strength in her shoulders, the economical efficiency of her movements. When she disappeared into the room, he stood alone in his living room, experiencing a sensation he hadn't felt in 15 years: uncertainty. This woman was not what he'd ordered. She was too young, too present, too composed in a way that suggested control rather than passivity. He'd expected someone who would fit into the empty spaces of his life like water-filling cracks, someone who would adapt. Alara Voss did not look like someone who adapted. She looked like someone who occupied space deliberately, who made her own terms. The canvas bag. She'd held it close, protective, even when accepting help with the larger trunk. What was in it that mattered more than clothes, more than toiletries? Caleb walked to the kitchen, annoyed with himself. This was exactly the kind of curiosity he'd sworn off. You start wondering about people. You start caring. You start caring. You start losing. He'd learned that lesson thoroughly. He filled the reservoir on the stove, added wood to the fire, and tried to return his mind to the familiar grooves of routine. There was fence to check on the north pasture, cattle to count, a wagon wheel that needed greasing. Work. Solid, simple work that didn't ask questions. But an hour later, when he came back inside to find Alara sitting at his desk, his account book spread before her, he felt that uncertainty sharpen into something else. She'd changed into a simpler dress, gray cotton, no bustle, no ornament. Her hair was still pulled back but slightly damp from washing. She had a pencil in her hand and was writing notes on a separate piece of paper, her face a mask of concentration. Find any problems? He asked. She didn't look up. Several. Caleb's jaw tightened. Such as? You're underselling your cattle. Now she did look up, her gray eyes meeting his without hesitation. Your records show you've been taking market price from the buyer in Cheyenne, but you're delivering direct to his facility, saving him transport costs. You should be negotiating a premium. He's been fair. Fair isn't optimal. You're also not accounting for seasonal grazing costs. You're lumping all feed expenses together, which means you can't identify inefficiencies. And, she tapped the ledger, you paid for fence repair in May, but I saw that fence. It's failing again. Whoever did that work used green wood. You overpaid for inadequate materials. Caleb stared at her. He'd been ranching for 15 years. He knew his business. But she was right. About all of it. How do you know about cattle pricing? He asked. I read. Reading doesn't teach you to spot green wood in fence posts. For the first time, something shifted in her expression. A tightening. A wariness. I observe. I learn quickly. That's what you hired me for. It was a deflection. A smooth one, but a deflection nonetheless. Caleb crossed his arms. Where are you from, Miss Voss? East. That's not specific. You didn't require specificity in your advertisement, Mr. Rourke. You required competence and discretion. But, she closed the ledger carefully, I'm providing both. If you'd like to dismiss me because I'm too competent, the next stage East runs in 3 days. Otherwise, I suggest we focus on the work. It was a challenge, polite, professional, but unmistakable. Caleb had 2 choices. Push for answers she clearly wouldn't give, or accept the boundaries she was drawing. He thought of the years he'd spent building those same boundaries around himself, the way he'd perfected the art of deflection, of keeping people at exactly the distance he needed. He had no right to demand more from her than he was willing to give. Dinner's at 6, he said. I'll expect those recommendations in writing by then. The corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement. You'll have them. He left her to the books and went back outside, but the uncertainty followed him. The first week passed in a careful dance of coexistence. Alara rose before dawn. Caleb heard her moving in the room above his, quiet but distinct. By the time he came downstairs, coffee was made, strong and hot. She didn't cook elaborate breakfasts. She made what was efficient. Eggs, bread, sometimes bacon, food that fueled work. She never sat with him at meals. She'd set his plate, pour his coffee, then take her own food to the kitchen where she'd eat standing, reading from a small notebook she carried. She was constantly working, not in the frantic way of someone proving their worth, but with the steady, relentless efficiency of someone for whom stillness was dangerous. She reorganized the pantry, labeled the preserved goods, created an inventory system. She took over the kitchen garden, clearing weeds with methodical precision. She fixed a broken shutter, oiled hinges that had been squeaking for months, patched 3 places where the roof leaked that Caleb hadn't even noticed. And every evening, she disappeared into her room with that canvas bag, staying there until morning. Caleb told himself he didn't care. This was exactly what he'd wanted, someone competent and independent who didn't require his attention. But he found himself noticing things. The way she always positioned herself with a view of the door. The way her eyes tracked movement before her head turned, military precise. The way she never fully relaxed, even when sitting. The way she flinched, just slightly, almost imperceptibly, when he approached from behind. On the 8th day, Marcus Webb rode out to the ranch under the pretense of delivering mail. In reality, he was burning with curiosity. Well? Marcus demanded, dismounting with the gracelessness of a man who preferred counterwork to riding. How's the arrangement working? Fine. Fine? That's all I get? Fine. Marcus peered toward the house where Alara was visible through a window, hanging curtains she'd somehow cleaned without Caleb noticing they'd been dirty. She looks capable. She is. Pretty, too. Caleb's voice went flat. That's not relevant. Just making an observation, Caleb. No need to get prickly. Marcus pulled an envelope from his saddlebag. This came for her, Eastern postmark. Caleb took the letter, noting the heavy paper, the expensive seal. Not personal correspondence. Something official. You could just give it to her yourself, Caleb said. And miss seeing the inside of your house? Not a chance. Sarah's been pestering me for details. Marcus was already heading for the porch. Inside, Marcus made a show of tipping his hat to Alara and introducing himself as the town's premier busybody, said with enough self-awareness to be charming. Alara accepted it with that same composed courtesy she showed everything, polite but boundaried. Letter for you, ma'am, Marcus said, producing the envelope with a flourish. The change was instant and terrifying. Every drop of color drained from Alara's face. Her hand, reaching for the letter, froze mid-air. For 3 seconds, Caleb counted them. She didn't breathe. Then the mask slammed back into place. She took the envelope, her fingers completely steady despite the fact that her face was still chalk white. Thank you, she said. Her voice didn't waver. Marcus, oblivious, was already rambling about town gossip. But Caleb was watching Alara, watching the way her thumb moved across the seal without breaking it, the way her eyes fixed on the return address, or rather, the absence of one. She knew who it was from, and she was terrified. After Marcus left, Caleb found her in the kitchen, standing at the counter, staring at the unopened letter like it might bite. Bad news? He asked. I don't know yet. She didn't look at him. Are you in trouble? Now she did turn, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he saw past the careful control to something raw underneath. Fear. Real, bone-deep fear that she was fighting to contain. I'm handling it, she said. That's not an answer. It's the answer you're getting. They stared at each other across the kitchen. Caleb thought about his own locked room upstairs, the door he never opened, the past he never discussed. He thought about the hypocrisy of demanding her secrets when he guarded his own so viciously. If someone's coming here, he said slowly, I need to know. No one's coming. But she said it too quickly. I said I'm handling it. Her voice cut like wire. Then, softer, with something that might have been desperation. Please, just let me handle it. He wanted to push. Every instinct said this was dangerous, that her secrets could become his problem. But those same instincts recognized something else. The look of someone who'd been hunted. Someone who'd learned to trust no one. If that changes, he said carefully, I need to know. She nodded. It might have been a lie. That night, Caleb lay awake in his room, listening to the sounds from above. Pacing. Slow, measured pacing that went on for hours. The sound of someone thinking, planning, preparing. The sound of someone running, even while standing still. When he finally slept, he dreamed of storms, of doors that wouldn't lock, of threats coming down a long road, inevitable as weather. 3 days later, a man rode into Holt's Crossing on a horse worth more than most of the buildings. His name was Mitchell Carver, and he wore his wealth like armor, tailored suit in charcoal gray, leather boots polished to mirrors, a watch chain that caught the light. He was 40, perhaps, with iron gray hair and the kind of face that power carves, hard, certain, used to winning. He went straight to the saloon and bought a round for the house. Looking for someone, he told the assembled men, all of whom had materialized the moment free whiskey was announced. Young woman, dark hair, would have arrived on the stage within the last 2 weeks, traveling alone. Family matter. We've been worried. He produced a daguerreotype. Caleb, who'd been in town to pick up supplies, stood at the back of the saloon and stared at the image. It was Alara. Younger, maybe, with her hair styled differently, but unmistakably her. Pretty thing, someone commented. Haven't seen her, though. You're certain? Carver's voice stayed pleasant, but something cold moved behind his eyes. There are only so many places to go out here. She would have needed shelter, supplies. Might try asking at the general store, Marcus suggested, and Caleb fought the urge to strangle him. Or check with some of the ranches, though most folks out here keep to themselves. Do they? It wasn't a question. Carver's gaze swept the room, measuring, assessing. When it reached Caleb, it lingered. Caleb kept his face blank, bored. The expression of a man killing time in town, not someone with any stake in the conversation. Well, Carver said, setting down his empty glass with the precise care of someone making a point. I appreciate your time, gentlemen. If anyone does recall seeing this young woman, there's a reward, $200. Whistles of appreciation. $200 was 6 months' wages for most men in Holt's Crossing. Caleb slipped out while Carver was answering questions, loaded his supplies with mechanical efficiency, and rode for home. He found Alara in the barn, mucking stalls with the focused intensity of someone trying not to think. She looked up when his shadow fell across the doorway. Pitchfork paused mid-thrust. There's a man in town looking for you, Caleb said without preamble. Well-dressed, Eastern, showed a picture. The pitchfork dropped. Alara's face went through a series of transformations, shock, calculation, resignation, before settling on something that looked like exhausted defeat. How long before he comes here? She asked. A day. Maybe less if someone talks. Someone will talk. She said it with the certainty of experience. $200? Caleb nodded. She'd guessed the reward. She knew how this worked. Then I need to leave. She was already moving, heading for the house. Now, before he... Who is he? She stopped, her back to him, shoulders rigid. You said you didn't need to know. I said, if someone was coming, I needed to know. Someone's here, so talk. He's an employee of my father's. Your father sent someone after you? Why? Because I wouldn't be what he wanted me to be. She turned, and her face was a careful blank. I wouldn't marry who he chose. I wouldn't produce heirs for his empire. I wouldn't disappear into a country house to be displayed at parties and ignored the rest of the time. So I ran. And he sent a bounty hunter. A fixer. Mitchell Carver handles my father's difficult problems. I'm a difficult problem. Her voice stayed level, but her hands had curled into fists. He'll offer you money, Mr. Rourke, more than you'd make in a year. He'll make it sound reasonable. A daughter needs to return home. Family is worried. I'm not in my right mind. He's very convincing. What happens if you go back? I marry Nathaniel Burke, the son of my father's business partner. I spend my life as a decorative asset, producing decorative children. And if I resist, I'll be declared hysterical and quietly institutionalized until I learn to comply. She said it without emotion, like reciting facts from a ledger, which made it worse somehow, the casual acceptance of her own planned erasure. You could have told me this from the start, Caleb said. Would you have agreed to the arrangement if I had? A woman on the run, bringing trouble to your door? She shook her head. I gambled that I could stay quiet enough, hidden enough, that they'd give up. I was wrong. She started walking again, faster now. Caleb followed her into the house, watching as she pulled that canvas bag from under her bed. Not packed, already packed, always ready. Where will you go, he asked. West. California, maybe. Farther than they'll look. With what money? She hesitated. I have some. Enough to get you across 3 territories? To set up a new life? To hide from a man who clearly has resources? Caleb crossed his arms. You'll be caught in a week. Then what do you suggest? Anger flashed in her eyes, the first real emotion he'd seen her show freely. I can't stay. I can't go back. Those are my options. They stared at each other across the small bedroom, and Caleb felt himself standing at a crossroads he hadn't anticipated. She was right. He could let her go, collect his $200 from Carver, return to his solitary life. Clean, simple, exactly what he'd wanted. Or, tell me about your father, he said. His name, his business, everything. Why? Because I need to know what we're dealing with. We? Her voice cracked slightly on the word. You can't run forever, Miss Voss. Eventually, you have to stand. Stand against Harrison Voss? She laughed, bitter and exhausted. He owns shipping companies, railroad shares, half the import business in New York. He has senators in his pocket, men like Mitchell Carver on his payroll. You can't stand against that, Mr. Rourke. You can only run. Maybe. Caleb moved to the window, looking out at the land he'd carved a life from through sheer stubborn refusal to surrender. Or maybe you've been running from Eastern men who fight with money and influence. Out here, those things matter less. You don't understand what you're saying. I understand that you came here for protection, for security. That was our deal. He turned back to her. If I let Carver take you, I'm breaking that deal. I don't break deals. This isn't what you signed up for. I signed up for someone competent and discreet who wouldn't bring complications. He almost smiled. You've been competent and discreet. The complications aren't your fault. They followed you. So now the question is whether I honor my word or not. Alara was staring at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. You'd risk your ranch, your life, for a legal agreement about housekeeping? No. Caleb held her gaze. I'd risk it because I gave my word. And because I've spent 15 years building walls to keep the world out. Maybe it's time to figure out what I'm willing to defend inside those walls. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications neither was quite ready to name. He'll destroy you, Alara said quietly. He can try. Why? The question burst from her raw and desperate. Why would you do this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Caleb thought about the locked room upstairs, about the life he'd buried 15 years ago, about the careful, controlled existence he'd built from the wreckage. Lonely, maybe, but safe. Always safe. About how Alara had walked into his house 2 weeks ago and immediately seen every inefficiency, every place where he was losing ground. How she'd fixed things without being asked. How she'd respected his boundaries even while clearly nursing secrets of her own. About how she'd made coffee this morning, strong and hot, and left it in his favorite cup without comment. about the sound of her pacing overhead, planning her next escape, never resting, about what it costs to run forever. Because, he said finally, everyone deserves one place they don't have to run from. Her eyes filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. She nodded once, sharp and definite, like a salute. Then we need a plan, she said. Carver will come tomorrow, maybe tonight. He'll be polite at first. He'll offer money, express concern. If that doesn't work, he'll threaten. Subtly at first, then more directly. He always escalates in stages. Does he work alone? Usually, he prefers to handle things quietly. Then we have an advantage. This is my land, my territory, and I know every inch of it. Caleb's mind was already working through possibilities, tactics. It had been years since he'd had to think this way, but the skills came back easily, too easily. We make him understand that you're under my protection, that touching you means going through me. He won't believe a marriage contract signed 2 weeks ago. Who said anything about marriage? Alara blinked. Then how? Leave that part to me. For now, pack what matters most. Keep that bag ready. If things go wrong, you head for the north pasture. There's a line shack 5 miles out, stocked with supplies. You can hide there while I handle Carver. I won't leave you to... You'll do exactly what I tell you to do. His voice went hard. This works only if you trust me to handle it. Can you do that? She studied him for a long moment, and he wondered what she saw. A rancher who'd barely spoken 50 words in 2 weeks? A fool taking on a fight he couldn't win? Or something else, someone else, beneath the careful control? Yes, she said finally. I can trust you. It was the first fully honest thing either of them had said. D10. Mitchell Carver arrived at sunset, golden light painting the land in shades of amber and rust. He rode alone, confident, a man used to winning through civilization rather than violence. He was in for a surprise. Caleb was waiting on the porch, rifle across his knees. Not aimed, not threatening, just present. A statement. Carver dismounted with practiced ease, dusting off his suit. Mr. Rourke, I presume. Mitchell Carver. I apologize for the intrusion. State your business. Direct. I appreciate that. Carver smiled, professional and empty. I'm searching for a young woman who ran away from home. Her family is deeply concerned. I have reason to believe she may have come to this area. A lot of women come through here. This one is distinctive. Alara Voss, dark hair, gray eyes, quite striking, would have arrived alone on the stage recently. Carver watched Caleb's face carefully. You haven't seen anyone matching that description? Caleb took his time answering, letting the silence work. Finally, maybe, Carver's smile sharpened. Maybe? Woman matching that description works for me. Came 2 weeks back. I see. And is she available to speak with? No. Mr. Rourke, I assure you this is a simple family matter. She's my wife. The words landed like stones in still water. Carver's expression froze. I beg your pardon? Mail order arrangement, all legal. We were married 3 days after she arrived. Caleb's voice stayed flat, bored. So whatever family matter you're handling, it involves a married woman on her own property. That changes things. Mr. Rourke, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Alara is unwell. She's not capable of making such decisions. Her father doesn't have authority over her anymore. I do. That's how marriage works. Carver's jaw tightened. You're aware that coercing a mentally unsound woman into marriage is illegal? I'm aware that abducting a legally married woman from her home is illegal. Caleb stood, rifle still casual but present. Now you seem like an educated man, Mr. Carver. So let me educate you about how things work out here. This is my land. She's under my protection. You want to argue law? We can ride into Holt's Crossing and discuss it with the territorial judge. But I should warn you, Judge Morrison's very particular about Eastern men coming out here trying to reclaim women who've made legal arrangements to escape them. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Harrison Voss, shipping magnate, rich enough to buy senators. Caleb's voice stayed steady. And you're his fixer, Mitchell Carver. You make problems disappear quietly. But here's the thing, Carver. You're not in a city where money and influence matter most. You're on open land where force matters, where being right matters. and where a man's word about protecting what's his is worth more than all your boss's money. Carver's pleasant mask finally cracked. She's not actually your wife. Prove it. I can make one trip to the county records. Go ahead. While you're gone, we'll finalize the paperwork. Judge Morrison makes house calls for the right price. It was a bluff, but a confident one. Or you can accept that Alara made her choice and ride back to New York with that message. Either way, you're leaving my property. Now! Carver stared at him, rage and calculation warring in his eyes. Finally, he smiled again, colder this time, with edges. You're making a mistake, Mr. Rourke. Harrison Voss doesn't forget. He doesn't forgive, and he always collects what belongs to him. She doesn't belong to him. She belongs to herself. And she chose here. Did she choose, or did she simply run out of places to go? Carver mounted his horse with deliberate slowness. I'll be in town for 3 days. If Alara wishes to speak with me to correct this misunderstanding, I'll be at the saloon. Otherwise, Mr. Voss will hear about this obstruction, and he will respond. I'll sleep easy regardless. Carver rode away, his posture rigid with controlled fury. Caleb waited until the dust settled before lowering the rifle. His hands were steady, years of practice keeping fear from showing, but his heart was hammering. He'd just declared war on a man who could destroy him with telegrams and lawyers, who had resources Caleb couldn't begin to match. He'd done it for a woman he'd known 2 weeks. For the first time in 15 years, Caleb had chosen something besides safety. Behind him, the front door opened. Alara stepped onto the porch, her face unreadable. You lied to him, she said. Yes, we're not married. No. He'll verify that. He'll come back. Probably. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, why did you do it? Caleb turned to face her and found himself saying something he hadn't planned, something true and dangerous. Because you were right. I don't know you, but I know what it looks like when someone spent their whole life being told they don't own themselves. I know what that does to a person, and I decided I'd rather fight your father's entire empire than be the reason you had to keep running. Alara's careful control finally shattered. She covered her face with both hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs that she tried desperately to muffle. Caleb stood awkwardly, uncertain. He was unpracticed in comfort, clumsy with gentleness. But slowly, carefully, he reached out and rested one hand on her shoulder. She leaned into it like a drowning person grabbing a rope. They stood there as the sun finished setting, the Wyoming sky turning to fire. Two people who'd built their lives on running and hiding, choosing, maybe for the first time, to stand. The house felt different after Carver left. Smaller, somehow, as if the walls had drawn closer. Caleb moved through the rooms, checking window latches and door locks with methodical precision, while Alara stood in the center of the living room, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You should eat something, he said finally, breaking the weighted silence. I'm not hungry. Doesn't matter. You need to eat. She didn't argue, just followed him into the kitchen where he pulled out bread, cheese, and the remains of yesterday's stew. They sat at opposite ends of the table, the same careful distance they'd maintained for 2 weeks, but now it felt different, charged with something unspoken. Alara picked at her food, her mind clearly elsewhere. After several minutes, she spoke without looking up. He won't give up, you know. Carver. My father pays him specifically because he doesn't give up, I figured. And the marriage lie will only work for a few days, maybe less. He'll send someone to check county records, verify the claim. When he finds out it's false, then we make it true. The words hung between them like smoke. Alara's head snapped up, her gray eyes wide. What? Caleb set down his fork with deliberate care, meeting her gaze directly. We get married. Actually married. Judge Morrison can do it tomorrow if we ride into town early. Legal papers, witnesses, everything official. By the time Carver verifies anything, it'll be the truth. You can't be serious. Why not? It was always part of the arrangement. We just accelerate the timeline. The arrangement was for practical partnership, not, she gestured helplessly, not this, not marriage under duress as a defense against my father's lawyers. You have a better idea? Alara stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Her hands were trembling slightly. the first crack in her armor he'd seen since the initial shock of Carver's arrival. "Do you understand what you'd be taking on? My father won't just send Carver back. He'll come himself if he has to. He'll bring lawyers, investigators, pressure every official contact he has. He'll make your life a legal nightmare. Let him try. And if he decides legal avenues are too slow, if he decides to handle this another way." She turned back to face him, her voice dropping. "Men like my father don't accept defiance, Caleb. They eliminate it." It was the first time she'd used his given name. The intimacy of it startled them both. "I'm not afraid of your father," Caleb said quietly. "Then you're a fool." "Maybe, but I'm a fool who made you a promise, protection, security, a place you don't have to run from." He stood, crossing to where she stood rigid by the window. "That promise doesn't change just because the threat got bigger." "Why?" The question came out raw, almost angry. "Why are you doing this? And don't tell me it's about honor or keeping your word. Nobody risks everything for a stranger over abstractions." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, looking past her at the darkening landscape beyond the window. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, rougher than usual. 15 years ago, I had a wife, Sarah. We'd been married 3 years trying to start a family. This house, he gestured around them, I built it for her, for the life we were planning. He paused, fighting against the weight of words he hadn't spoken aloud in over a decade. There was a fever that winter, scarlet fever, the doctor said. It swept through 3 counties. Sarah got sick on a Monday. By Friday, she was gone. Alara's expression softened, understanding beginning to dawn. I couldn't save her, Caleb continued. Couldn't do anything but watch. And afterward, I locked myself away. Built walls. Decided that caring about anything, anyone, was too expensive, too dangerous. He finally looked at her directly. I've spent 15 years proving I could survive alone. And I can. But survival isn't the same as living. You asked why I'm doing this? Because somewhere between you fixing my fences and reorganizing my pantry and drinking coffee at dawn before I even wake up, I remembered what it felt like to have someone else in this house, to have something worth protecting. And I'll be damned if I let your father take that away just because I'm too much of a coward to fight for it. The silence that followed was absolute. Alara's carefully constructed composure crumbled entirely. Tears spilled down her cheeks, unchecked, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. How to let someone stand with me instead of running. How to trust that you won't change your mind when things get harder. Things are already hard. I'm still here. For how long? As long as you need me to be. She laughed, shaky and disbelieving. You're insane. This whole thing is insane. Probably. Does that mean no? Alara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so unguarded it made her look years younger. Then she straightened, pulling that familiar control back around herself like armor, but looser now, less suffocating. If we do this, if we actually get married, it has to be real. Not just paper to wave at Carver. Her voice strengthened as she spoke, finding solid ground. I won't be a wife in name only, used when convenient and ignored otherwise. We do this as true partners, or we don't do it at all. Agreed. And I need to know what I'm walking into. This house has secrets. She glanced toward the stairs, toward the second floor where one door remained perpetually closed. You've opened one of yours. I need to know the rest. Caleb felt his jaw tighten involuntarily. The room. She'd noticed the locked door. Of course she had. Alara noticed everything. But asking him to open it was asking him to excavate grief he'd spent 15 years burying. Not tonight, he said roughly, but soon, I promise. Alara studied him, weighing his words against his expression. Finally, she nodded. Soon, not never. Not never. Then yes. She said it firmly, like signing a contract. We'll get married, we'll make it real, and we'll deal with whatever comes together. Caleb extended his hand, formal and serious. Alara looked at it for a moment, then reached out and clasped it. Her palm was calloused from work, her grip strong and sure. They shook on it like business partners sealing a deal, but when their hands released, something had fundamentally shifted between them. The careful distance was still there. Neither of them knew how to dismantle walls built over years, but now it felt like distance by choice rather than necessity. Space they were both allowed to cross when ready. "We should leave at dawn," Caleb said, forcing his mind back to practical matters. "Judge Morrison lives on the north edge of town. If we catch him early, we can have the papers filed before Carver even wakes up." "What about witnesses?" "Marcus and his wife Sarah will do it. They've been pestering me about my personal life for years. This'll make their entire month." A ghost of a smile crossed Alara's face. "The man from the general store? The one who delivered the letter? He means well. Talks too much, but he's trustworthy." "And his wife?" "Sarah Webb is the closest thing Holt's Crossing has to a mayor's wife. Gets things done, doesn't gossip more than necessary. You'll like her." Alara nodded, already shifting into planning mode. "I'll need appropriate clothing. The blue wool dress is too plain for a wedding, even a practical one." "You look fine in the blue dress." "It's not about looking fine, it's about looking legitimate. If this marriage is going to withstand legal scrutiny, every detail matters." She was already moving toward the stairs. "I have something more suitable in my trunk. It'll need pressing." "Alara." She paused, turning back. "It's going to work," Caleb said. "We're going to make this work." She wanted to believe him. He could see it in her eyes, the desperate hope warring with learned cynicism. But she just nodded once and disappeared upstairs, leaving Caleb alone with the echo of his own promises. He spent the next hour preparing for morning, laying out his good suit, gray wool he'd worn to exactly 3 events in 15 years, all funerals, and checking his rifle one more time. He told himself it was precaution, not paranoia. But he found himself returning to the windows repeatedly, scanning the darkness for riders who weren't there. Not yet. When he finally went to bed, he lay awake listening to the familiar sound of Alara pacing overhead. But tonight, after about an hour, the pacing stopped. He heard her settle, heard the creak of bed springs as she lay down. Maybe she was learning to rest too. The thought stayed with him as he drifted into uneasy sleep. They left the ranch before sunrise, riding side by side through the purple dawn. Alara sat her horse well, another skill she hadn't mentioned, added to the growing list of capabilities that suggested a far more complex past than she'd revealed. She wore a dress of deep green silk that must have cost a fortune, elegant without being ostentatious, and she'd done something different with her hair, softer, with a few curls framing her face. She looked beautiful. Caleb tried not to notice. Holt's Crossing was just waking when they arrived, smoke rising from morning fires, the blacksmith already at work. Caleb led them directly to Judge Morrison's house on the outskirts of town, a modest structure that nevertheless radiated the dignity of its occupant. Judge Lawrence Morrison was 73, sharp as broken glass, and deeply distrustful of anyone who tried to waste his time. He answered the door in his shirt sleeves, spectacles pushed up on his forehead, and surveyed them with the expression of a man preparing to be disappointed. "Rourke, it's 6 in the morning." "Yes, sir. We need to get married." Morrison's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "Need to?" "Want to," Caleb corrected. "Today, if possible." The judge's gaze shifted to Alara, cataloging her expensive dress, her composed bearing, the way she met his scrutiny without flinching. "And who might you be?" "Alara Voss, sir. Soon to be Alara Rourke, if you'll perform the ceremony." "Voss." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "That name's been floating around town. Man came through yesterday asking about a woman named Voss. Well-dressed fellow, Eastern money. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" "I know everything about it," Alara said calmly. "That man works for my father, who wants to force me into a marriage I don't want. Mr. Rourke has offered me protection and partnership. We'd like to formalize that arrangement legally before my father's employee can interfere further." Morrison studied her for a long moment, then turned his attention back to Caleb. "You understand what you're taking on, Rourke? Man with Eastern money and lawyers can make life difficult out here." "I understand." "And you, Miss Voss? You're entering this marriage of your own free will? No coercion? No pressure?" "Complete free will, sir." "Mr. Rourke has shown me more respect in 2 weeks than my father showed in 28 years. I'm choosing this." The judge grunted, stepping back to let them in. "I'll need witnesses. You have anybody in mind?" "Marcus and Sarah Webb." "Good enough. Go fetch them while I get dressed properly. Can't marry people in my undershirt, even at dawn. Come back in 20 minutes." Marcus Webb nearly fell over when Caleb explained what they needed. Married? You and Miss Voss? Today? He was already reaching for his coat, shouting for Sarah. Sarah! Sarah! Get your good dress on. We're witnessing a wedding. Sarah Webb emerged from the back room, a sturdy woman with intelligent eyes and graying hair. She took in the situation with one swift glance, smiled warmly at Alara, and said, About time someone shook up this town. Give me 5 minutes. It took 7, but nobody minded. Judge Morrison performed the ceremony in his front parlor, surrounded by law books and the smell of coffee. It was brief, practical, stripped of sentimentality, which somehow made it more powerful. When Morrison asked if they would honor and protect each other, both answered with firm conviction. When he declared them legally wed, Sarah dabbed at her eyes while Marcus grinned like he'd personally arranged the whole thing. Caleb slipped the ring onto Alara's finger, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, retrieved from a locked drawer that morning. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting. You may kiss your bride, Morrison said in his dry courtroom voice. Caleb hesitated. They hadn't discussed this part. But Alara solved the problem by rising slightly on her toes and pressing a soft, brief kiss to his lips. Chaste, formal, but undeniably real. Her hand rested lightly on his chest for balance, and he felt his heart hammering beneath her palm. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. Hello, husband. Hello, wife. Sarah hugged them both while Marcus pumped Caleb's hand enthusiastically. Morrison filled out the official papers with meticulous precision, signed and sealed them, and handed the certificate to Alara. Keep that somewhere safe, he advised. You'll need it when that Eastern gentleman comes calling again. When, not if, Alara asked. Men like that don't take no for an answer the first time, but they usually respect legal authority when it's properly documented. Morrison's expression softened slightly. You've got good people here, Mrs. Rourke. We take care of our own in Holt's Crossing. If that fellow tries anything improper, you come to me. Thank you, sir. They filed the papers at the county clerk's office, opened specially at Morrison's request, and were back in the saddle by 8 o'clock, legally married with documentation that would stand up to any scrutiny. The ride home was quiet, not uncomfortable, but weighted with awareness. Everything was different now. The woman riding beside him was his wife. The man beside her was her husband. The words carried implications neither was quite ready to examine. Halfway back to the ranch, Alara spoke. We should discuss arrangements. Arrangements? Living arrangements, sleeping arrangements. She kept her eyes forward, but he saw the tension in her shoulders. We agreed this would be a real marriage, but we didn't define what that means practically. Caleb had been carefully not thinking about this. What do you want it to mean? I don't know. She sounded frustrated with herself. I've never done this before. Married someone I actually chose, I mean. My father's version would have been separate bedrooms, separate lives, mandatory appearances at social functions. I don't want that. But I also don't want to assume expectations you're not ready for. I'm not expecting anything, Caleb said carefully. You can keep your room. We can take this at whatever pace makes sense. That feels like we're still pretending, living separately under one roof. Then what do you suggest? Alara was quiet for a long moment, working through something internal. When she finally spoke, her voice was determined. I think we should share space. Not immediately. We both need time to adjust. But gradually. Start taking meals together at the same table. Talk in the evenings instead of separating to different rooms. Learn to exist together instead of around each other. She glanced at him. Does that seem reasonable? More than reasonable. In the physical aspect, she stopped, clearly uncomfortable but pushing through it. I'm not asking for romance or passion. I know this isn't that kind of marriage, but eventually I'd like to share a bed, for practical reasons, if nothing else. It's easier to defend one room than two, and she took a breath. And I'm tired of sleeping alone, of being alone, even if all we do is sleep. Caleb felt something crack open in his chest, some sealed compartment he'd locked 15 years ago. She was describing exactly what he'd felt but couldn't articulate. The bone-deep weariness of isolation, the hunger for simple human presence. We can try that, he said quietly. When you're ready. Thank you. They rode on in renewed silence, but it felt companionable now, like they'd negotiated a treaty and both sides were satisfied. The ranch appeared ahead, solid and enduring against the morning sky. Caleb had left it as a solitary man. He was returning as a husband. The transformation felt surreal. As they dismounted and led the horses to the barn, Alara suddenly laughed. A real laugh, surprised and genuine. "What?" Caleb asked. "I just realized. I'm married. Actually married. To a man I met 2 weeks ago." She shook her head in disbelief. "My father would be apoplectic if it weren't exactly what he wanted, just with the wrong man." "Having regrets already?" "No." She said it firmly, meeting his eyes. "No regrets? This is the first decision I've made in years that feels entirely mine." They were standing close in the dim barn, horses shifting in their stalls around them. Caleb felt the pull of proximity, the temptation to close the distance further, but he held back, giving her space. Alara seemed to sense the restraint. She reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. "Thank you for all of this. We're partners now. You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do, at least once." She smiled, a small, hesitant expression that transformed her entire face. "After that, we'll just be even." The rest of the day unfolded in strange domesticity. They worked side by side, Alara helping with ranch tasks while Caleb showed her which fences needed attention and which cattle were due to calve soon. They took lunch at the same table, sitting across from each other and actually talking about the ranch, about practical matters, carefully avoiding anything too personal. But something had loosened between them. When Alara made a dry observation about the rooster's aggressive territoriality, Caleb laughed. Actually laughed, a sound he barely remembered making. When Caleb explained his system for rotating pastures, Alara asked intelligent questions that showed she was genuinely interested, not just being polite. It felt like building something. Slowly, carefully, but deliberately. Evening came too quickly. They made dinner together, moving around the kitchen in careful choreography, and ate as the sun set fire to the western sky. Afterward, by unspoken agreement, they sat together in the living room, Alara with her ever-present notebook, Caleb with account ledgers. "What are you always writing in that thing?" he asked after an hour of comfortable silence. She looked up, surprised. "Observations. Plans. Things I need to remember." "Like what?" "Like..." Whoosh. She hesitated, then apparently decided transparency was part of their new arrangement. "Like how you take your coffee, black, no sugar, in the tin cup with the dent. Like which horses are nervous and which are steady. Like the fact that you check the perimeter every night before bed, always in the same order: barn, chicken coop, north fence line, water pump." She met his gaze. "I pay attention, Caleb. It's how I survive." "You don't have to just survive anymore." "Old habits." But she said it softly, almost wistfully. At 10 o'clock, they both stood, suddenly awkward. This was usually when they separated, retreating to their individual spaces. But now, married, the separation felt wrong somehow. "I should..." Alara gestured vaguely toward the stairs. "I'll check the locks," Caleb said. They stood there for another moment, neither quite willing to move first. Finally, Alara stepped forward and kissed his cheek, quick, light, but intentional. "Good night, husband." "Good night, wife." She climbed the stairs and Caleb watched her go before making his nightly rounds. Everything was secure. No riders on the horizon. No immediate threats. But as he settled into bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger was just beginning. Carver wouldn't give up this easily. And Harrison Voss had resources that made legal marriage certificates seem like thin armor. They'd bought time. Now they needed to figure out how to fortify their position before that time ran out. The answer came from an unexpected source 2 days later. Caleb was mending fence on the east pasture when he saw the rider approaching, not from town, but from the direction of the Johnson Ranch 5 miles north. Tom Johnson was a cattleman Caleb respected, a man of few words and solid judgment. "Rourke?" Tom called as he dismounted. "Heard you got married. Congratulations." "Word travels fast." Word travels exactly as fast as Marcus Webb can ride." Tom's weathered face creased into something approaching a smile. "Also heard you might be having trouble with that Eastern fellow, the one asking about your wife." "Might be." "Want some advice?" Caleb gestured for him to continue. "A man like that operates on intimidation." He's counting on you being isolated, easy to pressure. But you're not isolated. Not if you don't want to be. Tom resettled his hat. I've got 3 sons, all grown, all armed. Hendersons have 2. Patterson's got nephews visiting from Colorado. We've all been watching Eastern interests try to buy up land, push out locals. If this Carver decides to make trouble, he'll find he's not dealing with just you. You'd stand with me against Voss money? I'd stand with you because you're our neighbor, because your wife chose to be here instead of back east, and because men like Voss need to learn they can't just take whatever they want, wherever they want. Tom gathered his reins. I'm not saying start a war. I'm saying you've got backup if you need it. Pass that along to your wife. Tell her she's got a whole territory of stubborn bastards who don't take kindly to Eastern men threatening our women folk. He rode off before Caleb could properly thank him. That evening, when Caleb relayed the conversation to Alara, she looked stunned. They do that? Stand against my father's people? They don't even know me. That's how it works out here. You're part of the community now. That means something. Alara turned away, but not before he saw her eyes fill with tears. I don't know how to process that. I've spent my entire life in a world where everything was transactional, where loyalty was purchased and alliances were strategic. People don't just help. Some people do. She nodded, wiping her eyes quickly. I need to do something useful. Standing around being grateful makes me uncomfortable. There's a pile of account notices from the bank I've been avoiding. Show me. They spent the next 3 hours going through financial papers, and by the end, Alara had identified 2 overcharges and a missed payment credit that together would save the ranch nearly $100. She worked with fierce concentration, as if proving her value through sheer competence. Caleb watched her, this fierce, careful woman who'd walked into his life 2 weeks ago and turned everything sideways, who'd married him in a dawn ceremony to escape one trap and stepped willingly into partnership with a stranger, who took notes on how he liked his coffee and checked window locks before bed, and was currently saving him money with the focused intensity of someone fighting a battle only she could see. Alara, he said quietly. She looked up from the papers. You don't have to earn your place here. I know. Do you? She set down her pencil carefully. I'm working on it. Give me time. Take all the time you need. That night, when they parted on the landing, she kissed him again, still chaste, still brief, but warmer than before. Her hand lingered on his arm for an extra heartbeat. Getting closer, she murmured, almost to herself. To what? To believing this is real. She disappeared into her room, leaving Caleb standing in the hallway, his arm warm where her hand had been. On the 3rd morning after their wedding, Caleb made a decision. He found Alara in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with the efficient precision she brought to everything. When she turned to greet him, he said without preamble, Come with me. There's something I need to show you. She followed him upstairs, clearly puzzled, until he stopped in front of the closed door at the end of the hall. The door that had remained locked for 15 years. The door she'd never asked about directly, though he'd caught her glancing at it more than once. Caleb pulled the key from his pocket. He'd carried it for 15 years without using it, and unlocked the door. It opened with a creak of disused hinges. The room beyond was frozen in time. A woman's bedroom, untouched and perfectly preserved. Lace curtains yellowed with age. A vanity with hairbrush and bottles still arranged just so. A wardrobe full of dresses that smelled of lavender and dust. A bed made with military precision, waiting for someone who would never return. This was Sarah's room, Caleb said quietly. Our room, when she was alive. After she died, I locked it. Left everything exactly as it was. Told myself it was respect, but really it was cowardice. Easier to seal it off than deal with what it represented. Alara walked slowly into the room, her fingers trailing along the vanity, the curtains, the footboard of the bed. She picked up a small portrait in a tarnished frame, a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She was beautiful, Alara said. She was good, better than me in every way that mattered. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, not entering. I loved her completely. And when she died, I died with her. Just kept walking around for the next 15 years, going through motions. Until a stubborn woman with secrets stepped off a stagecoach and started fixing my fences. Alara set down the portrait and turned to face him. Why are you showing me this now? Because we made an agreement. Real partnership means real honesty. This is my honesty. I've been hiding from grief for 15 years. I built a life that couldn't hurt me because it couldn't matter. And then you came along and reminded me that safety isn't the same as living. He met her eyes directly. I'm ready to live again, starting with this room. It's time to let it go. What do you want to do with it? I don't know yet, but I know it can't stay locked forever. Maybe we go through things together, decide what to keep and what to give away. Sarah wouldn't want a shrine. She'd want... His voice caught. She'd want someone to use her things, to let the room be lived in again. Alara crossed to him, taking both his hands in hers. Then that's what we'll do. Together. They spent the afternoon carefully, reverently, beginning to sort through Sarah's belongings. Alara handled everything with respect, asking before touching anything, making no assumptions. When she found a wedding dress wrapped in tissue paper, she looked to Caleb for permission before unfolding it. It's beautiful, she said softly, running her hand over the ivory silk. Keep it if you want. Are you sure? Sarah would want it used, not locked away, and we never had a proper wedding ceremony, nothing like she deserved. Maybe someday, if you want, we could do something more traditional. You could wear it. Alara's eyes widened. Caleb, this is too precious. It's precious because it meant something. It'll mean something again if you wear it. Otherwise, it's just expensive fabric turning to dust. He stepped into the room for the first time in 15 years, standing beside her. I'm not asking you to replace her. Nobody could. But I'm asking you to help me move forward. To take what was good about the past and let it live in the present. Alara carefully refolded the dress, her movements gentle. Thank you for trusting me with this. They worked until sunset, making piles, things to donate, things to save, things Caleb wasn't ready to decide about yet. It was painful, cathartic, necessary. By the time they stopped, both were exhausted in the way that comes from emotional labor rather than physical work. We should eat, Alara said. You look like you need food and rest. I need whiskey and silence. I can do whiskey and company. Silence is negotiable. She made a simple dinner while Caleb poured 2 glasses of whiskey, the good stuff he kept for emergencies and apparently weddings and emotional excavations. They ate mostly in silence, but it was comfortable, shared. After dinner, instead of separating, they sat together on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Alara had brought a blanket against the evening chill, and after a moment's hesitation, she draped part of it over Caleb's shoulders as well, creating a shared cocoon of warmth. Tell me about her, Alara said quietly. Not how she died, how she lived. So Caleb talked about Sarah's laugh, which was too loud for propriety, and delighted him because of it. About how she'd convinced him to build the house bigger than he thought they needed, insisting they'd fill it with children and life. About the way she'd garden in bare feet despite his protests, saying she liked feeling the earth directly. About her terrible singing voice and excellent pie crust, and the way she'd argued politics with visiting ranch hands, holding her own against men twice her size. He talked until his voice grew hoarse, and Alara listened without interrupting, occasionally refilling his whiskey, her presence steady and grounding. When he finally ran out of words, she said simply, She sounds wonderful. I wish I could have known her. She would have liked you. You're both stubborn as hell. Alara smiled. High praise. They sat in comfortable silence, shoulders touching under the shared blanket. After a while, Caleb became aware that Alara was shivering slightly despite the covering. Cold? A little. But I don't want to go in yet. Without overthinking it, Caleb put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer against his side. She stiffened for just a moment, instinctive wariness, then deliberately relaxed, leaning into his warmth. Is this okay? He asked. Yes. Her voice was soft but certain. Yes, this is okay. They stayed like that, watching the stars wheel overhead, 2 damaged people learning to be whole together. Eventually, Alara's breathing evened out, and her head drooped against his shoulder. She'd fallen asleep. Caleb sat very still, afraid to wake her. She looked younger in sleep, the careful control stripped away. Vulnerable, trusting him to keep watch while she rested. He would. For as long as she needed, he would. When the cold finally drove him inside, he carefully scooped her into his arms. She murmured something unintelligible but didn't wake. He carried her upstairs and laid her on her bed, removing her shoes and pulling a quilt over her. As he turned to leave, her hand shot out and caught his wrist. Her eyes opened, unfocused with sleep. "Stay," she mumbled. "Just for a while." Caleb hesitated, then lowered himself to sit on the edge of the bed. Alara's hand remained wrapped around his wrist, tethering him there. "Not going anywhere," he said quietly. She smiled faintly and drifted back to sleep, her grip loosening but not releasing. Caleb sat in the dark room, watching his wife sleep, and felt the last of his carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. He stayed until dawn lightened the windows, then carefully extracted his wrist and went to start the day. When Alara came downstairs an hour later, she didn't mention it, but the way she looked at him over morning coffee said everything that needed saying. They were learning each other, building trust in small increments, careful as architects laying foundation stones. Whatever storm was coming, and both knew it was coming, they would face it together. That was worth more than all Harrison Voss's money and power combined. The peace lasted 5 days. 5 days of carefully constructed normalcy, of shared meals and evening conversations, of Caleb teaching Alara to shoot, and Alara teaching Caleb that his bookkeeping system was a disaster waiting to happen. 5 days of small intimacies, hands brushing as they passed dishes, shoulders touching as they reviewed ledgers, goodnight kisses that lasted a fraction longer each evening. 5 days of pretending the world beyond the ranch didn't exist. On the 6th day, Mitchell Carver returned with reinforcements. Caleb saw them coming from the north pasture where he was checking cattle. 4 riders moving with purpose, not the casual pace of travelers. He recognized Carver's black gelding immediately, and his stomach turned to ice. He rode hard for the house, pushing his mount faster than was wise on uneven ground. Alara was in the vegetable garden, wearing one of Sarah's old work dresses that she'd altered to fit. She looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, saw his face, and immediately understood. "How many?" she called. 4. Maybe 5 minutes out." She dropped the basket of beans she'd been harvesting and ran for the house. By the time Caleb had his horse secured and his rifle loaded, she was back outside with her canvas bag, still packed, still ready, and a revolver he didn't know she owned. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "I bought it in Chicago before I left. I'm not a good shot, but at close range I can make it count." Her voice was steady, but he could see the fear in her eyes. 4 men, Caleb. That's not a legal retrieval. That's a kidnapping party. They're not taking you. If they have enough men, they could have 20. Doesn't change anything. He positioned himself on the porch, rifle across his knees in the same posture he'd adopted during Carver's first visit. "Go inside. Lock the door. If shooting starts, get to the root cellar and stay there until I come for you. I'm not hiding while you saw Alara." He looked at her directly, and she must have seen something in his expression because she stopped arguing. "I can't fight them properly if I'm worried about you catching a stray bullet. Please, trust me to handle this." She wanted to refuse. He could see the struggle on her face, the instinct to stand and fight warring with practical sense. Finally, she nodded and moved to the door. But before going inside, she turned back. "Don't die for this. For me. If it comes down to it, let them take me. I'll find another way. No. Caleb, no." He said it with finality. "We made vows, for better or worse. This is worse. We deal with it together, which means I keep you safe and you let me." Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I never asked you to be a hero." "Good. I'm not one. I'm just a stubborn man who doesn't like being told what to do on his own land." He managed a tight smile. "Now get inside before I have to carry you." She went, but he heard her position herself just inside the doorway, close enough to act if needed. Stubborn woman. His stubborn woman. The riders came into view moments later, kicking up dust as they approached. Carver led the group, still impeccably dressed despite days in rough country. Behind him rode 3 men who had the hard-worn look of professional enforcers, hired muscle, probably from Chicago or New York, men who solved problems with violence and didn't ask questions. They stopped 20 feet from the porch in a formation that was clearly meant to intimidate. Carver dismounted with theatrical slowness, while his men remained mounted, hands resting conspicuously near their weapons. "Mr. Rourke," Carver said, his voice carrying false pleasantry, "I believe we have unfinished business." "We don't. I told you last time, she's my wife, legally married. You've got no claim. Ah, yes. About that marriage. Carver pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. I took the liberty of verifying your claim with the county records. Imagine my surprise when I discovered you were married just days after our last conversation. Rather convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Legal timing. Legal, perhaps, but highly suspicious. It raises questions about consent, about whether Mrs. Rourke, was coerced into this arrangement as a means of evading her familial obligations. She consented freely. Judge Morrison will testify to that. Judge Morrison is a territorial official with no authority over matters of Eastern law. Miss Voss is a New York resident. Her father has legal guardianship until such time as she marries with his consent. Carver's smile was razor sharp. Your marriage performed without that consent is invalid under New York statutes. We're not in New York, we're in Wyoming territory, where territorial law applies, and territorial law says she's my wife. A technical argument that will be resolved in court. In the meantime, Carver gestured to his men, Mr. Voss has directed me to escort his daughter back to New York where this matter can be properly adjudicated. I'm sure you understand. I understand you're trespassing, and I'm asking you to leave. One of Carver's men shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward his gun. Caleb's rifle moved fractionally, not quite pointing at anyone, but no longer casually resting. The message was clear. Mr. Rourke, please be reasonable, Carver said, though his eyes had gone cold. You're outnumbered, you're outmatched, and you're on the wrong side of a very powerful man. Nobody needs to get hurt today. Then ride away and nobody will. I'm afraid that's not an option. Mr. Voss has been extraordinarily patient, but his patience has limits. Alara belongs to her family. She's coming with us one way or another. She belongs to herself, Caleb said flatly. And she chose to stay. A choice made under duress, clearly. Look at this place, isolated, primitive, no proper society. What woman would choose this voluntarily over the comfort and security of her father's house? A woman who values freedom over comfort. Now get off my land. Carver's pleasant mask finally cracked completely. Enough theater, Rourke. I'm taking Alara with me today. You can let her go peacefully, or my men can persuade you. Your choice, but choose quickly. The three hired men spread out slightly, creating overlapping fields of fire. Professional positioning. These weren't thugs. They were trained. Caleb did the calculation instantly. 4 against 1, with Alara inside as a liability they could threaten. If it came to shooting, he might take 2 before they got him. Maybe 3 if he was lucky and they were slow, but not all 4. And once he was down, nothing would stop them from taking Alara. He needed to change the equation. Before this gets uglier, Caleb said calmly, you should know that you're not dealing with just me. You're dealing with every rancher in this territory who's tired of Eastern money trying to push us around. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning look behind you. Carver turned, as did his men. Coming up the road from the south were 6 riders. Tom Johnson led the group, his 3 sons flanking him. Behind them rode Samuel Henderson and his brother, all armed, all grim-faced. They stopped in a loose line between Carver's group and the road out, blocking the exit. Tom touched his hat brim in greeting. Afternoon, Rourke. Saw you had visitors. Thought we'd stop by, being neighborly. Appreciate it, Tom. Fishy, this is none of your concern, Carver snapped, his composure fracturing. This is a private family matter. Anything involving our neighbors is our concern, Tom interrupted. And we heard you were making threats, talking about taking Mrs. Rourke against her will. That's not how we do things out here. She's not actually his wife. This whole thing is a fraud perpetrated to obstruct. We were at the wedding, Samuel Henderson said flatly. Marcus Webb and his wife witnessed it. Judge Morrison performed it. It's legal as anything else in this territory. Now you can accept that and ride out peaceable, or we can have a different kind of conversation. Carver's face had gone purple with rage. You're all making a tremendous mistake. Mr. Voss has resources you can't begin to imagine. He'll bury this entire pathetic settlement. Let him try, Tom said. But today, right now, you're leaving empty-handed. Question is whether you leave vertical or horizontal. The 3 hired men were looking at each other, clearly reassessing. They'd signed up for easy money, intimidating an isolated rancher, not a range war against half a dozen armed locals. One of them leaned toward Carver and said something low and urgent. Carver's jaw worked, fury and calculation warring in his expression. Finally, he jerked his head in a sharp nod. Fine, we're leaving, but this isn't over, Rourke. Not even close, Mr. Voss will hear about this obstruction, and he will respond. And when he does, your neighbors won't be able to save you. Guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Caleb said. Carver remounted with sharp, angry movements. His men fell in around him, and the whole group rode out at speed, passing between Tom's line of riders with barely controlled rage radiating from every gesture. Nobody moved until the dust settled and the riders disappeared from view. Tom dismounted and walked over to the porch, his sons and Henderson following. That's going to come back on you, Rourke. Man like that doesn't forget. I know. You prepared for what comes next? Because it won't just be hired muscle. He'll bring lawyers, marshals, maybe even federal authority if his boss has those kind of connections. We'll handle it. We'll help however we can. But you need to understand, Tom's expression was serious. This has become bigger than just you and your wife. You've made this a stand about whether Eastern money can just take what it wants out here. Every rancher in 3 counties is watching to see how this plays out. No pressure then. Tom almost smiled. Just saying. You've got support, but you've also got responsibility now. Don't throw your life away on principle when there might be smarter plays. What kind of smarter plays? Publicity. Make this public enough that taking her by force becomes politically impossible. Write to newspapers. Get your story out there before Voss can spin it his way. Eastern papers love a good frontier romance story. Runaway heiress marries rugged rancher to escape forced marriage. That's the kind of thing that sells copies. Caleb glanced at the door where he knew Alara was listening. That would mean exposing her, making her a public figure. Better a public figure than a prisoner, Samuel Henderson said. And if enough people know the story, Voss can't quietly disappear her. He'd have to justify his actions in court, in front of journalists. That's protection better than guns. It made strategic sense, but it meant asking Alara to give up any hope of privacy, of anonymity. It meant making their marriage, still so new and tentative, into a public spectacle. The door opened and Alara stepped out, her revolver no longer visible, but her canvas bag still clutched tight. She looked at the assembled men, then at Caleb. They're right, she said quietly. My father thrives in darkness and backroom dealing. Public scrutiny is the one thing he can't easily control. She took a breath. We should contact newspapers. Tell our story on our terms before he can twist it. That means reporters coming here, asking questions about your past, your reasons for running. You sure you want that? I don't want it, but I'll do it if it keeps us both alive and free. She stepped closer to him. Besides, the truth is simpler than any lie we'd have to maintain. I ran from a forced marriage. You offered protection. We fell into partnership and made it legal. That's a story people will believe because it's true. Tom nodded approvingly. Smart woman you married, Rourke. Don't I know it? I'll talk to Marcus. His wife has a cousin in Cheyenne who works for the Tribune. Good place to start. Tom gathered his reins. Meanwhile, keep your eyes open. Carver may be gone, but men like that hold grudges. He might try something before legal channels can work. After the neighbors left, Caleb and Alara stood alone on the porch, the adrenaline of confrontation slowly draining away and leaving exhaustion in its wake. That was terrifying, Alara said. Yeah, but also incredible. Watching your neighbors ride in like that, knowing they'd stand with us. She shook her head in wonder. I've never had that before. People who'd risk themselves for someone else's fight. It's not just your fight anymore. Tom was right. This has become about something bigger. I'm sorry for that, for dragging you and everyone else into... Caleb pulled her close, cutting off the apology. She came willingly, pressing her face against his chest. He could feel her trembling, the fear she'd kept controlled finally releasing now that the immediate danger had passed. Stop apologizing for being worth fighting for, he said into her hair. Your father's the one who should apologize. For treating you like property, for sending hired men to take you by force, for making you feel like wanting freedom was somehow wrong. She made a choked sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. When you say things like that, I almost believe them. But believe them. They're true. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, until Alara's trembling stopped and her breathing evened out. When she finally pulled back, Her eyes were dry, but her expression was fierce. If we're going to fight him publicly, I need to tell you everything. No more edited versions or careful omissions. You deserve to know exactly who Harrison Voss is and what he's capable of. All right, let's go inside. This sounds like a conversation that needs coffee. They settled at the kitchen table, and Alara began to talk. The story came out haltingly at first, then faster, as if a dam had broken. She told him about growing up in a Manhattan mansion that was more museum than home, where children were displayed at parties but otherwise kept separate from adult lives. About a mother who died when Alara was 12, leaving her alone with a father who saw her only as a business asset to be developed and eventually traded. He started planning my marriage when I was 16, she said, staring into her coffee cup. Nathaniel Burke was 25 then, the son of father's primary business partner. They'd arranged it between them like a merger, which is essentially what it was. My dowry for their railway expansion project, my social connections for their political ambitions. I was just the contract that made it legal. Did Burke know you didn't want this? Oh, he knew. He didn't care. Nathaniel is not cruel exactly, just utterly indifferent to anything that doesn't directly benefit him. He told me once that marriage was a business arrangement and I shouldn't expect romance or companionship from it. He had mistresses for that. I was to provide heirs and maintain social appearances. That was my function. Caleb's hands tightened around his coffee cup. And your father agreed to this? My father designed it. He raised me to be decorative and obedient, to smile at parties and never express opinions on anything of substance. When I started reading his business papers, teaching myself about finance and trade, he was furious. Women weren't supposed to understand such things. We were supposed to be beautiful furniture that produced grandchildren. But you're brilliant with numbers and strategy. I've seen you work. I taught myself in secret. Father had an extensive library. He never thought to lock it because he never imagined I'd be interested. I'd sneak in at night and read everything: economics, law, history, philosophy. By the time I was 20, I probably knew his businesses better than half his executives. She smiled bitterly. Not that it mattered. He still saw me as a chess piece to be moved, not a person with thoughts of her own. How did you finally get away? The wedding was set for September 15th. I had 3 months. I started planning immediately, gathering money, buying traveling clothes, researching where I could go that Father's influence was weakest. The Western territories seemed safest, remote, lawless enough that Eastern legal authority didn't automatically apply. The canvas bag. Everything I couldn't risk leaving behind. Money I'd stolen from my own trust fund, technically theft, which Father will absolutely use against me if he can. Documents proving my identity. My mother's jewelry, the only things I owned that were truly mine. And a gun, because I knew Father wouldn't just let me go. Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. You're not a thief for taking your own money. The courts might disagree. Father's lawyers will argue I'm mentally incompetent, that I stole from my own trust because I wasn't capable of rational thought. It's a standard tactic for controlling unruly daughters. Declare them hysterical, institutionalize them until they comply. That's barbaric. That's wealth and power. Rules don't apply the same way when you can afford to rewrite them. She squeezed his hand. That's what we're fighting, Caleb. Not just my father's anger, but an entire system designed to keep women like me in their place. And that system has lawyers, judges, institutions all aligned to enforce it. Then we'll fight the system. With what? We've got a handful of ranchers and a territorial judge. Father's got senators, federal marshals, newspapers on his payroll. We're badly outmatched. Maybe. But we've got something he doesn't. What's that? The truth. And people's instinct to root for the underdog. Caleb stood, pacing to the window. Tom was right about publicity. We get your story out there. The whole story, nothing held back. And we make it impossible for your father to claim you're mentally incompetent or that I coerced you. We let people see you as you are, smart, capable, making choices for yourself. That's harder to discredit than you think. You have a lot of faith in public opinion. I have faith in you, and I'm betting other people will too once they meet you. Alara looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Then she stood and crossed to where he stood by the window. She took his face in both hands and kissed him, not the brief, formal kisses of their careful courtship, but something deeper, real, full of all the fear and gratitude and desperate hope she'd been holding back. When she pulled away, her eyes were bright. How did I get this lucky? Lucky? You're being hunted by your own father. Yes, but I found you. That's lucky. She rested her forehead against his. I spent my whole life being told what to be, how to act, who to marry. And then I met a man who asked me who I wanted to be, who treated my competence as an asset instead of a threat, who stood up to hired guns because he'd given his word. She laughed shakily. So yes, despite everything, I'm lucky. Caleb wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. We're going to get through this. Promise? Promise. It was reckless to promise such things when the odds were so stacked against them. But standing there with his wife in his arms, Caleb believed it. They'd find a way. They had to. The next 3 days were a flurry of activity. Marcus Webb's wife sent word to her cousin at the Cheyenne Tribune, who immediately recognized the story's potential. A reporter named Catherine Mills arrived on the Thursday stage, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd made her name covering society scandals and wasn't easily impressed. She spent 2 hours interviewing Alara while Caleb waited outside, resisting the urge to interrupt or protect. Alara had insisted on handling it alone, and he had to trust that. When Mills emerged, she looked at Caleb with something like respect. Your wife is remarkable, sharp as a blade and twice as brave. If I can get even half of what she told me into print, you'll have public opinion solidly on your side. What did she tell you? Everything. Her father's business practices, the arranged marriage, her escape, your marriage, the confrontation with Carver and his threats. She didn't spare herself or sugarcoat anything. Mills tucked her notebook into her bag. Voss is going to hate this story. It makes him look like exactly what he is, a tyrant who treats his daughter like property. That's the kind of thing readers eat up, especially when it involves a frontier romance angle. When will it run? Day after tomorrow, if my editor agrees, which he will. This is front-page material. She paused. You should prepare yourselves. Once this is public, you'll have more reporters coming. Curiosity seekers. Possibly more trouble from Voss. Public attention is protection, but it's also intrusive. We'll handle it. Mills smiled slightly. I believe you will. Take care of her, Mr. Rourke. Women like your wife are rare. Don't I know it? After Mills left on the evening stage, Caleb found Alara in their room, no longer her room, but theirs. They'd moved her things into the larger bedroom 3 days ago, a practical decision that had felt monumentally significant. They still slept with careful space between them, but every night that space grew smaller. She was sitting on the bed, still dressed, staring at nothing. How do you feel? Caleb asked from the doorway. Exposed? Like I just stripped naked in front of a stranger and hoped she'd be kind. Alara looked up at him, but also relieved. I've been hiding for so long, performing for so long. It's almost freeing to just tell the truth and let it stand on its own. Mills said the story would run day after tomorrow. I know, she told me. Alara took a shaky breath. Once it's in print, there's no taking it back. My father will see it. Nathaniel will see it. Everyone in New York society will know I ran, know what I said about them. I'll never be able to go back to that world. Do you want to go back? No, not even a little bit. But it's still strange to burn a bridge so completely, so publicly. She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkening land. This is my world now. This ranch, this territory. You. Caleb crossed to stand behind her, close but not quite touching. Having second thoughts? About you? Never. About everything else? She leaned back against him and his arms came around her automatically. I'm terrified, Caleb. Absolutely terrified. But I'm also more certain than I've ever been. This is where I'm supposed to be. With you. Building something real. He turned her to face him, cupping her face in his hands. I love you. The words surprised them both. They hadn't said them before, had been carefully avoiding anything that felt like pressure or expectation. But standing there in the fading light, with everything uncertain except each other, the truth simply came out. Alara's eyes widened, then filled with tears. You do? I do. I love how you organize my pantry at midnight because you can't sleep. I love how you learned to shoot in 3 days because you refuse to be helpless. I love your terrible poker face and your brilliant mind and the way you hum when you're working on accounts. I love that you ran halfway across the country for freedom and ended up trapped in a marriage with a broken-down rancher, and somehow you're still here, still fighting, still choosing this. You're not broken down, she said fiercely. You're the strongest person I've ever met, and I love you too. I've been trying not to because it seemed too soon, too complicated, but I can't help it. I love you, Caleb Rourke. I love your honor and your stubbornness, and the way you opened a room you'd kept locked for 15 years because I needed you to be honest. I love that you stood up to armed men for me, that you're standing up to my father's entire empire for me, that you make me coffee every morning in that tin cup with the dent because you remembered it's my favorite. He kissed her then, and she kissed back with an urgency that spoke to all the fear and love and desperate hope they'd been holding in check. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb said hoarsely, "Stay with me tonight. Really stay. Not just sleeping in the same room, but—" "Yes," she interrupted. "Yes. I want that. I want you. I want this to be real in every way." What followed was tender and awkward and perfect. They fumbled with buttons and laughed at their nervousness and took their time learning each other. When they finally came together, it was with a sense of homecoming that transcended the physical. This was partnership made complete, trust made tangible, two people who'd spent years building walls finally tearing them down. Afterward, lying tangled together in the dark, Alara traced patterns on Caleb's chest and said quietly, "Whatever happens tomorrow or the day after, I want you to know, this was worth it, all of it, every risk, every fear, finding you made it all worth it." "We're going to survive this," Caleb said with absolute certainty. "Your father, the publicity, whatever comes. We'll survive it because we're not facing it alone anymore. Promise?" "Promise." She fell asleep curled against him, safe and trusting, and Caleb lay awake watching her breathe. Tomorrow the article would run. Tomorrow the real battle would begin. But tonight, in this moment, they had each other. That would have to be enough. The article hit the Cheyenne Tribune on Friday morning and spread like wildfire. By evening, 3 more papers had picked it up. By Saturday, it had reached Denver, Salt Lake City, and was making its way east. Catherine Mills had written it perfectly. Romantic enough to capture attention, detailed enough to be credible, damning enough to make Harrison Voss look like a monster. The headline read, "Frontier Bride Escapes Gilded Cage. Manhattan Heiress Chooses Wyoming Rancher Over Forced Marriage." The story laid out everything: Alara's imprisonment in luxury, the arranged marriage to a man who saw her as property, her daring escape, and her decision to marry Caleb. It painted a vivid picture of Carver's attempts to abduct her and the community of ranchers who'd stood in defense. It made Caleb sound like a hero and Harrison Voss sound like a villain, which meant Voss would respond. The only question was how. The answer came on Monday afternoon in the form of a telegram delivered by a nervous clerk from town. Caleb read it twice, his expression darkening with each pass. "What does it say?" Alara asked, though she could tell from his face it was nothing good. "It's from a law firm in New York. Sterling and Associates. They represent your father." He handed her the telegram. She read it, her hands beginning to shake. The message was brief but devastating. Legal action commenced. Annulment petition filed, New York Supreme Court. Mrs. Alara Voss ordered to return for testimony. Failure to comply will result in federal warrant. You have 10 days. "They're taking it to court," she whispered, "asking for annulment on grounds of mental incompetence and coercion. If they win, they won't win. You don't know that. They have judges in their pocket, medical experts who will testify to whatever father wants. They'll paint me as hysterical, claim you took advantage of me during a mental breakdown. Then we fight them. We go to New York if we have to, stand in front of their judge, and prove them wrong. We can't afford lawyers who can compete with Sterling and Associates. They're the most prestigious firm in Manhattan. Then we represent ourselves. Or find someone who believes in justice more than money." Caleb took her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Listen to me. Your father thinks he's already won because he's used to winning. But he's never faced someone who refuses to surrender. We have the truth, we have public opinion now, and we have each other. That's not nothing. It might not be enough. Then we make it enough." Alara wanted to believe him, but she'd seen her father destroy people before, competent people, powerful people, people who thought they were safe. Harrison Voss didn't just win, he annihilated. And now he was coming for them with everything he had. The 10 days stretched ahead like a countdown to execution. Caleb watched Alara cycle through stages of panic and determination, sometimes within the same hour. She threw herself into work with manic energy, reorganizing storage they'd already organized, scrubbing floors that were already clean, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling into worst-case scenarios. On the third day after the telegram arrived, she was in the barn mucking stalls with such violent intensity that Caleb finally had to intervene. "You're going to injure yourself," he said, taking the pitchfork from her hands. "I need to do something. I can't just stand around waiting for my father to destroy everything we've built." Her voice cracked. 10 days, Caleb. We have 10 days to figure out how to fight the most powerful law firm in New York with no money, no legal expertise, and no... We're not doing this alone. He set the pitchfork aside and pulled her close despite her resistance. "Stop carrying all of this by yourself. We're partners, remember?" She sagged against him, exhaustion finally overwhelming adrenaline. "I'm so tired of fighting. Sometimes I think about just giving up, going back, letting him win. At least then you'd be safe." "No, you don't understand what he'll do to you if... I don't care what he does to me. I care about what he'll do to you, and I'm not letting that happen." Caleb tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You told me once that you'd spent your whole life running. Well, you're done running. We stand here, together. And if your father wants to take you, he'll have to go through me, through Tom and his sons, through every person in this territory who's decided you're worth defending." "Why?" The question burst from her, raw and desperate. "Why are all of you willing to risk so much for me? I'm nobody. Just a runaway with more problems than solutions." "You're not nobody. You're Alara Rourke, you're my wife. And you're the woman who walked into my life and reminded me that some things are worth fighting for." He kissed her forehead gently. "Now stop trying to martyr yourself and help me figure out our strategy." She nodded against his chest, breathing deep to steady herself. "What strategy? We can't win a legal battle in New York." "Maybe we don't have to. Maybe we change the battlefield." "What do you mean?" "Your father wants you back in New York where he controls everything, the courts, the judges, the narrative. But what if we refuse to go? What if we fight him here in Wyoming, where territorial law applies, and he's just another Eastern businessman with no special authority?" Alara pulled back to look at him properly. "They'll issue a federal warrant. They can force us to comply." "Can they? Or are they banking on us being too scared to call their bluff?" Caleb was thinking out loud now, pieces clicking together. Judge Morrison would know. He'd know whether New York courts actually have jurisdiction over a Wyoming marriage, and whether a federal warrant would even be enforceable for what amounts to a civil dispute. Hope flickered in Alara's eyes, tentative but real. "You think they're bluffing?" "I think your father's used to people backing down when he makes threats. I think he's counting on us being intimidated by legal language and fancy letterhead, but threats only work if you believe them. We need to talk to Judge Morrison, today." They rode into Holt's Crossing within the hour, the telegram clutched in Alara's hand. They found the judge in his office reviewing land dispute filings with the methodical precision he brought to everything. He read the telegram twice, his expression darkening. "Sterling and Associates, fancy firm, expensive too." "Can they actually do this?" Caleb asked. "Force her back to New York for an annulment hearing?" "That depends." Morrison set the telegram down carefully. The marriage was performed in Wyoming territory under territorial law. That's clear jurisdiction. New York courts would have to prove extraordinary circumstances to override that: fraud, coercion, mental incompetence. And they'd need evidence, not just accusations. "My father will manufacture evidence," Alara said quietly. "He'll find doctors to testify I was hysterical, witnesses to claim Caleb coerced me. He's done it before to other people who opposed him." "Maybe. But manufactured evidence has to hold up under scrutiny. And right now, thanks to that newspaper article, there's a lot of public scrutiny." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "Here's what I think is happening. Your father wants you back in New York where he controls the environment. The annulment petition is real, but the federal warrant threat is probably exaggerated. They can file all the petitions they want, but actually enforcing a warrant for what amounts to a domestic dispute between a daughter and father? That requires federal marshals, and federal marshals don't jump for every rich man who wants his daughter back. So we ignore it? Caleb asked. Not ignore, challenge. You file a response with the New York court stating that Mrs. Rourke contests the petition, that she entered the marriage willingly under Wyoming law, and that she's not subject to her father's guardianship as a legally married woman. You make them prove their case through depositions and written testimony rather than forcing her into their territory. Can we do that without going to New York? That's the strategy. You're not refusing to participate in legal proceedings. You're asserting your right to participate under terms that don't require surrendering to your opponents before the fight even starts. Morrison pulled out paper and began writing. I'll draft the response. You'll need to get it filed in New York within the deadline. I have contacts there who can handle the procedural aspects. Alara was staring at the judge with something like wonder. You'd help us do this? Fight my father's lawyers? Mrs. Rourke, I've been a territorial judge for 30 years. I've seen Eastern money try to push around Westerners more times than I can count. Usually they win because people don't know how to fight back, or they're too intimidated to try. But you've got something most don't have. You've got community support, public attention, and a legitimate legal position. He met her eyes directly. I don't like bullies, never have. So yes, I'll help you fight back. The response was drafted, signed, and sent east via urgent telegram the same day. It bought them time. Not much, but enough to breathe, enough to plan. That night, lying in bed with Alara curled against his side, Caleb felt her trembling despite the warmth of blankets and body heat. Talk to me, he said quietly. I keep thinking about what happens if we lose, if the court rules in his favor, if they force an annulment. Her voice was small in the darkness. Would you fight it? If a federal marshal actually showed up with papers saying our marriage was invalid? Yes. Even if it meant jail. Even if they charged you with contempt or obstruction. Even then, I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm choosing. He shifted so he could see her face in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. Alara, I need you to understand something. When I married you, I didn't do it as a legal maneuver or a temporary arrangement. I did it because somewhere between you fixing my fences and calling out my terrible bookkeeping, I started to care whether you were safe, whether you were happy, whether you stayed. He brushed hair back from her face. You're not just my wife on paper. You're my wife in every way that matters. And nobody, not your father, not his lawyers, not any court, can change that. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, and they made love with an urgency born of uncertainty. Afterward, she fell asleep in his arms, her breathing finally even and peaceful. Caleb lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling and making calculations. If this went to court, really went to court, not just legal posturing, they'd need money. Money for lawyers, for travel if it came to that, for fighting a prolonged battle against opponents with unlimited resources. The ranch was profitable, but not wealthy. He had savings, but nothing approaching what would be needed. He'd have to sell cattle early, maybe take out a loan against the land. It would hurt, potentially set them back years financially. But what was money compared to keeping Alara safe? Compared to protecting what they'd built together? He'd burn the ranch to the ground before he'd let Harrison Voss take her. The response from New York came faster than expected, 3 days instead of the week or more Morrison had predicted. The telegram was delivered by the same nervous clerk, who looked like he wanted to drop it and run. Caleb opened it with Alara reading over his shoulder, both of them braced for the worst. Instead, they got confusion. The telegram was from Sterling and Associates, but the tone had shifted dramatically from the first message. This one was formal, careful, and notably absent of threats. Mrs. Rourke's response acknowledged. Request for postponement granted pending depositions. Mr. Voss requests private mediation before proceeding. Will pay all expenses for neutral location meeting. Please advise availability. Mediation? Alara said, bewildered. My father doesn't mediate, he dictates. Maybe the newspaper attention changed his approach. Public legal battles are messy, expensive, and unpredictable. Mediation lets him negotiate in private, away from reporters. Caleb reread the telegram. Or it's a trap to get you somewhere isolated. A trap seems more likely. Agreed, but what if we call his bluff again? Accept the mediation, but set the terms. Public location, our choice of mediator, everything documented and on record. Make it impossible for him to control the situation. He'll never agree to that. Then we haven't lost anything. But if he's actually willing to negotiate rather than just demand, Caleb let the possibility hang between them. Maybe there's an opening there, something we can use. They took the problem to Judge Morrison, who listened carefully, and then surprised them both by saying, "You should do it." "You think we should meet with her father?" Caleb asked, incredulous. "I think you should hear what he has to say, on your terms, in a controlled environment. Right now, you're operating on assumptions about what Voss wants and how far he'll go. Mediation gives you actual information, and if he's offering to pay expenses for a neutral location, he's already conceding ground. He knows he can't just order you around anymore." "What location would be neutral?" Ilara asked. "Denver, big enough for anonymity, Western enough that your husband's not on unfamiliar ground, but cosmopolitan enough to have proper legal resources and witnesses." Morrison was already writing again. "I have a colleague there, retired judge named Arthur Chen, brilliant man, completely incorruptible. If anyone can mediate fairly between you and your father, it's him." "And if my father refuses?" "Then you've demonstrated good faith while he's demonstrated intransigence. That plays well if this ends up in court." Morrison handed Caleb the draft response. "You're in a stronger position than you realize. Voss has lost control of the narrative. The newspapers made him look like a tyrant, and public opinion is against him. He needs a way to save face while extracting himself from a situation that's becoming increasingly expensive and embarrassing. Give him that path, but make him walk it on your terms." The mediation was scheduled for 3 weeks out in Denver, at a law office Judge Morrison's colleague had arranged. Harrison Voss would pay for travel and accommodations as promised. Arthur Chen would mediate. Everything would be documented and witnessed. 3 weeks to prepare for coming face-to-face with the man who'd haunted Ilara's nightmares for months. "I don't know if I can do this," she said the night before they were scheduled to leave. "Sit across a table from him and negotiate like he's a reasonable person instead of a monster." "You don't have to do it alone. I'll be right there." "He'll try to separate us. Insist on speaking to me privately. That's how he operates. Isolate, intimidate, control. Then we make it a condition of mediation. No private conversations. Everything happens with both of us present, with Chen mediating. Your father doesn't get to rewrite the rules just because he's used to having power." "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple. It's the hardest thing either of us will probably ever do, but we're doing it together, and that makes all the difference." They left for Denver on a cold October morning, the ranch secured under Tom Johnson's watchful eye. The train ride took 2 days, and Ilara spent most of it staring out the window, watching the landscape change from open plains to rolling hills to the distant peaks of the Rockies. "He'll look older," she said suddenly, somewhere in eastern Colorado. "I haven't seen him in 5 months. He'll look older and tired, and he'll use that. Make himself look like the suffering father worried about his wayward daughter. Let him try. Chen will see through it." "You have a lot of faith in a man you've never met." "I have faith in Morrison's judgment, and I have faith in you." Caleb took her hand. "You're not the same woman who ran from New York 5 months ago. You're stronger now, surer of yourself. He'll see that, and it'll throw him off balance." She wanted to believe him, but the closer they got to Denver, the more she felt like the frightened girl she'd been, small and powerless in the face of her father's vast authority. Denver was bustling and modern, electric lights stringing the streets and automobiles rattling past horse-drawn carriages. Their hotel was modest but clean, and they spent the evening before the mediation going over strategy, anticipating arguments, preparing responses. "He'll offer money," Ilara predicted. "A settlement to make this go away quietly. He'll promise to leave us alone if I sign away any claim to the family name or inheritance." "Would you take that deal?" "I don't want his money. I never did, but—" She hesitated. "If it meant ending this without more fighting, without risking you or the ranch or everything we've built, I'd consider it." "Don't decide now. See what he actually offers first. Might not be nearly as reasonable as you're imagining." The mediation was scheduled for 10 o'clock the next morning. They arrived early and were shown into a conference room with dark wood paneling and a long table. Arthur Chen was already there, a man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He shook their hands with grave courtesy and explained the process clearly and fairly. "I'm not here to take sides," he said. "I'm here to facilitate communication and help you reach an agreement that respects everyone's interests. Everything said in this room is confidential unless you agree otherwise. And either party can call for a break at any time if things become too heated. Harrison Voss arrived exactly at 10, accompanied by 2 lawyers from Sterling and Associates. He was a tall man, still powerfully built despite being in his mid-60s, with iron gray hair and the kind of face that commanded boardrooms, strong jaw, piercing eyes, an expression of habitual authority. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Caleb's entire wardrobe, and he carried himself like a man who'd never been told no in his life. His eyes went to Alara immediately, and something flickered across his face, not the warmth of a father seeing his daughter, but the cold assessment of a man evaluating property that had attempted to escape. "Alara," he said, his voice deep and controlled, "you look different." "I am different," she said, her voice steadier than Caleb had expected. Voss's gaze shifted to Caleb, dismissive at first, then sharpening as he registered the way Caleb had positioned himself, not subservient, not intimidated, but protectively close to Alara, equal. "Mr. Rourke, I presume, the rancher who married my daughter." "That's correct." "I've heard a great deal about you, very little of it flattering." "I imagine not, given your sources." The corner of Voss's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement of the parry. "Shall we sit?" Chen gestured to the table, and they arranged themselves carefully. Alara and Caleb on one side, Voss and his lawyers on the other, Chen at the head like a judge presiding over court. "Mr. Voss," Chen began, "you requested this mediation. Would you like to begin by stating your position?" Voss folded his hands on the table, the picture of reasonable concern. "My position is simple. My daughter left home in a state of emotional distress, without proper preparation or protection. She entered into a hasty marriage with a man she'd known less than a month, clearly influenced by fear and confusion rather than sound judgment. I'm not here to punish or reclaim. I'm here to ensure she's safe, properly cared for, and making decisions from a place of stability rather than panic." "That's a lie," Alara said flatly. Chen raised a hand. "Mrs. Rourke, you'll have your turn to speak. Please let your father finish." Voss continued as if she hadn't spoken. "I'm prepared to be generous. I understand that Alara felt pressured by the Burke arrangement. That was, perhaps, poorly communicated. I'm willing to dissolve that engagement permanently. I'm willing to provide financial support for Alara to establish herself independently with no strings attached. All I ask is that she agree to an annulment of this marriage, which was clearly entered under duress, and that she return to New York long enough to establish her legal independence properly." "And there it is," Alara said. "The reasonable father act, so concerned, so generous." She leaned forward, her voice hardening. "Let me tell you what he's actually offering. He'll dissolve the Burke engagement because it's become publicly embarrassing. He'll provide financial support that comes with 1,000 conditions and strings he can pull whenever he wants compliance. And he wants me back in New York so he can control the narrative, isolate me from support, and wear me down until I agree to whatever he actually wants, which is for me to disappear quietly into some acceptable role that doesn't embarrass him further." "That's not," one of the lawyers started, but Voss raised a hand, silencing him. "You always did have a vivid imagination, Alara," Voss said, his tone patronizing. "I'm trying to help you. You're trying to control me, like you've tried to control me my entire life, like you tried to control Mother before she died." Alara's voice was shaking now, but with anger rather than fear. "You don't see people, Father. You see assets and liabilities, tools and obstacles. I stopped being your daughter the moment I developed opinions of my own. That's not fair, isn't it? Name one conversation we've had in the last 10 years where you asked what I wanted, where you treated my thoughts as valid rather than problems to be corrected." She waited, but Voss said nothing. "You can't, because it never happened. I was a doll to be dressed and displayed, and when I refused to play that role anymore, you decided I was defective rather than questioning whether the role itself was the problem." Voss's mask of reasonableness was cracking. "I gave you everything, the finest education money could buy, the best society. You gave me a cage, a very expensive, very beautiful cage, but still a cage. And when I escaped, you sent men to drag me back." She gestured to Caleb. This man, this rancher you've been investigating and threatening, he's shown me more respect in 3 months than you showed me in 28 years. He asks my opinion. He values my skills. He treats me like a partner, not property. So no, I won't annul my marriage. I won't return to New York. And I won't accept your money or your conditions or anything else that gives you leverage over my life. The room was silent except for the ticking of a wall clock. Voss stared at his daughter like she was a stranger, which Caleb realized she was. This wasn't the obedient girl who'd fled New York. This was a woman who'd found her spine and learned to use it. If you refuse to be reasonable, Voss began, his voice cold now. I'm being completely reasonable. You're the one who can't accept that I'm an adult with the right to make my own choices. You're making choices that will ruin you. Or maybe I'm making choices that will save me. You can't tell the difference because you've never actually tried to understand what I need, what I want, who I am. Voss's hand came down on the table hard enough to make everyone jump. Enough. This is pointless. Alara, I'm giving you one more chance. Come home. We'll discuss terms once you're thinking clearly. I am thinking clearly, more clearly than I have in years, and my answer is no. Then you leave me no choice. Voss stood, his lawyers scrambling to follow. I'll pursue the annulment through the courts. I'll bring every resource I have to bear. And when you lose, and you will lose, you'll have nothing. No family, no inheritance, no support. You'll be completely alone. She won't be alone, Caleb said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken since the mediation began. She has me. She has an entire community that's chosen to stand with her. She has people who value her for who she is, not what she can provide them. That's more than money can buy. Voss turned his cold gaze on Caleb. And how long before you realize what a burden she is? Before the novelty wears off, and you're left with a woman who doesn't know how to do ranch work, who'll drain your resources, who'll expect a lifestyle you can't provide. She already provides more than she costs. She manages my accounts better than I ever did. She's learned everything I've taught her about ranching and then improved on it. She's made my house a home again after 15 years of it being just walls and furniture. Caleb stood as well, meeting Voss's glare steadily. You keep talking about her like she's a liability. The only liability here is your inability to see past your own ego to the remarkable woman your daughter is. That's your loss, not ours. For just a moment, something flickered in Voss's eyes. Not quite regret, but an acknowledgement of something irretrievable. Then it was gone, replaced by cold resolve. We're done here, he said to his lawyers, to Alara. When you've exhausted your resources fighting me in court, when this rancher realizes what defending you actually costs, you know where to find me. The door is open. For now. He left without waiting for a response, his lawyers trailing behind like attendants. The door closed with decisive finality. Chen let out a long breath. Well, that was less productive than I'd hoped. At least now we know where we stand, Caleb said. No more negotiations. No more pretending there's a middle ground. He'll escalate, Alara said quietly. He meant what he said about bringing all his resources to bear. This isn't over. It's just beginning. Then we escalate too. Caleb took her hand. We fight him in court, in public, wherever we need to. And we don't stop until he understands that you're not coming back. Chen watched them for a moment, then said thoughtfully, I documented everything. The threats, the ultimatums, his admission that he's pursuing this out of wounded pride rather than genuine concern for your welfare. If this goes to court, that testimony will be valuable. Thank you, Alara said, for trying to mediate fairly. I'm sorry it didn't produce a resolution, but sometimes the value in mediation isn't reaching agreement. It's establishing exactly where the battle lines are. He gathered his papers. If you need a witness statement for court proceedings, contact me. I'll testify to what happened here. After Chen left, Caleb and Alara sat alone in the conference room, the weight of what had just happened settling over them like snow. I stood up to him, Alara said, almost wonderingly. I actually stood up to him, told him no to his face. You did more than that. You showed him he has no power over you anymore. He'll make me pay for that. Let him try. Caleb pulled her close. We knew this was coming. At least now we're not waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's dropped, and we're still standing. She laughed shakily. Is it strange that I feel almost relieved? Like the worst part was the uncertainty, and now that we know it's war, we can at least plan for it? Not strange at all. Uncertainty is its own kind of torture. They left Denver the next day, returning to Wyoming with the knowledge that Harrison Voss would now throw everything he had at breaking them. Legal challenges, social pressure, financial warfare, all of it was coming, but they'd faced him together and hadn't broken. That had to count for something. The train carried them west through mountains and plains, back toward the ranch and the life they'd chosen. Alara slept with her head on Caleb's shoulder, exhausted from the emotional toll of confronting her father. Caleb watched the landscape scroll past and thought about battles and survival and what it meant to defend something worth keeping. They'd survive this. Somehow, they'd survive. They had to. The ranch looked different when they returned, not in any physical way, but in the way home looks different after you've been tested and survived. The building stood solid against the November sky, smoke rising from the chimney where Tom Johnson had kept fires going. The land stretched out around them, harsh and beautiful, unforgiving, but theirs. Tom met them at the barn, his weathered face creased with concern. How'd it go? About as expected, Caleb said, dismounting and helping Alara down. Voss wants war. We're giving it to him. Well, while you were gone, you got more ammunition. Tom pulled a stack of newspapers from his saddlebag. These started arriving 2 days after you left. Papers from all over, Chicago, St. Louis, even one from Boston. Seems your stories caught fire. Alara took the papers with trembling hands. The headlines varied, but the themes were consistent. Western bride defies Eastern tyranny. Rancher's wife stands against gilded cage. Love and liberty on the frontier. There's more, Tom said. You've been getting letters. Marcus has been holding them at the store, didn't want to forward them to Denver in case they were legal threats. But he said most look like they're from regular folks. How many letters? Caleb asked. Last I heard, over 50, and more coming every day. Inside the house, after Tom left and they'd settled back into the familiar rhythms of home, Alara spread the newspapers across the kitchen table and read them with growing amazement. The stories weren't just reporting facts. They were editorializing, taking sides, painting her father as a villain and their marriage as a symbol of independence and defiance. Listen to this, she said, reading from the Chicago Tribune. The question facing Harrison Voss is simple. Does he own his daughter or did she own herself? The answer reveals everything about the difference between Eastern aristocracy and Western freedom. In New York, women are property to be traded between powerful men. In Wyoming, they're people with the right to choose their own destiny. Mrs. Alara Rourke chose freedom. Her father should respect that choice rather than trying to buy his way around it. That's pretty direct, Caleb observed. This one's even better. She picked up another paper. Some will say Alara Voss, now Rourke, made a rash decision born of desperation. But desperation is the mother of courage. She saw her future laid out before her like a prison sentence and chose to run. She found a man willing to stand with her rather than above her. That's not rashness. That's wisdom. Harrison Voss could learn from his daughter's example, if pride didn't blind him to it. Caleb watched her read, seeing the transformation in her posture. Where before she'd hunched with anxiety, she now sat straighter. Where before she'd seemed small under the weight of her father's power, she now looked formidable. You realize what this means? He asked. That we have public opinion on our side? That you've become a symbol, not just for yourself, but for every woman trapped in a situation she didn't choose. Every daughter treated as property. Every person told their feelings don't matter as much as family obligation or social expectation. He moved to stand behind her chair, hands on her shoulders. That's powerful, Alara. That's the kind of pressure even someone like your father can't ignore forever. Or it makes him more determined to win, to prove he can't be defeated by public sentiment. Maybe. But it also means he has to be more careful. Every move he makes is being watched now, reported on, judged. That limits his options. The letters Tom mentioned arrived the next day, delivered in 3 canvas bags by a bewildered Marcus Webb. Never seen anything like this, Marcus said, hefting the bags onto the kitchen table. Letters from all over the country, women mostly, but some men too, all wanting to tell you their stories or offer support. After Marcus left, Caleb and Alara sat together reading them. Each letter was a window into someone else's struggle. Daughters forced into unwanted marriages, wives escaping abusive husbands, Women who'd been told their entire lives that their wants didn't matter. Some were heartbreaking. Some were angry. All of them thanked Alara for standing up, for showing them it was possible to fight back. One letter, from a woman in Ohio, struck particularly hard. My daughter is 16. My husband has already arranged her marriage to a man twice her age, a business associate he wants to strengthen ties with. She's terrified but sees no way out. When I showed her the newspaper story about you, something changed in her eyes. She said, "If Mrs. Rourke could run, maybe I can too." I don't know what we'll do yet, but for the first time, we're considering options we never thought possible. Thank you for showing us that cages can be broken. Alara's hand shook as she read it aloud. I helped someone. Just by refusing to give up, I helped someone. You've helped more than one someone. Look at all these letters. It's not enough though, is it? Helping individuals. The system that allows fathers to sell their daughters like cattle, that's still intact. My father's still powerful. The Burke family still expects women to be decorative assets. Nothing's actually changed. Yet, Caleb said. Nothing's changed yet. But every time someone reads your story and decides to fight instead of surrender, the system cracks a little more. Change doesn't happen all at once, Alara. It happens in small acts of defiance that add up over time. She wanted to believe him, but 3 days later, Harrison Voss reminded them that he wasn't done fighting. The legal papers arrived via courier, a man from a Denver law firm, nervous and apologetic. Voss had filed not just an annulment petition, but a full lawsuit alleging fraud, coercion, and conspiracy. He was suing for damages, demanding the return of money Alara had taken from her trust fund, and seeking criminal charges against Caleb for kidnapping and extortion. This is insane, Alara said, reading through the dense legal language. He's accusing you of kidnapping when I came here voluntarily, of extortion when you never asked me for anything. He's throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, creating enough legal chaos that we'll be forced to negotiate just to make it stop. Caleb was reading through the documents with a focus that belied his calm tone. This is going to be expensive, really expensive. We'll need lawyers. We'll need to travel for depositions. We'll need to mortgage the ranch, Alara finished quietly. I know. I've been doing the calculations. The legal fees alone will be more than we make in a year. And if this drags on, then we lose everything. They sat in heavy silence, the weight of that reality settling over them. Harrison Voss wasn't just fighting for his daughter anymore. He was fighting to destroy the man who defied him, to make an example of what happened when someone stood against his authority. There has to be another way, Alara said finally. Some angle we're not seeing, some pressure point that would make him back down. What could possibly pressure someone with that much money and power? I don't know, but there's always something. Father built his empire on leverage, finding what people wanted or feared and using it against them. He has to have vulnerabilities of his own. You know his business better than anyone. What would hurt him? Alara stood and began pacing, that familiar gesture of deep thought. His reputation. Everything Father does is about maintaining his position in society, his standing among other powerful men. That's why he's so furious about the newspaper stories. They make him look weak, like he can't even control his own daughter. If we could find something that threatened his reputation more than my defiance already has, what would that be? I need to see his business records. Account books, shipping manifests, anything that shows how he actually makes his money. She was thinking out loud now, pieces connecting. Father's always been secretive about certain parts of his business, things he'd redirect conversation away from when his associates asked questions. I never thought much about it, assumed it was just normal competitive discretion. But what if there's something he's hiding, something illegal or unethical that he can't afford to have exposed? How would we get access to those records? I don't know, but I know someone who might. She was already moving toward the door. We need to send a telegram. Today. The telegram went to someone named Charlotte Winters in New York, marked urgent. Alara explained while they waited for a response that Charlotte had been her mother's closest friend, a woman who'd maintained cordial but distant relations with Harrison Voss after her friend's death. More importantly, Charlotte was married to an investigative journalist who specialized in exposing corruption among New York's elite. If anyone has the resources to dig into Father's business and find something actionable, it's Robert Winters, Alara said. And Charlotte owes my mother a debt, Mother helped her when Charlotte's husband was being blackmailed by one of father's associates. She might be willing to help us now. The response came 2 days later. Investigating preliminary findings concerning. Need time to verify. Will update within week. CW. That week felt like a year. Caleb tried to focus on ranch work, but his mind kept circling back to legal documents and impossible odds. Alara threw herself into responding to the flood of letters, writing personal replies to as many as she could manage. It gave her purpose while they waited. On the 6th day, a package arrived via express courier, thick envelope, sealed with wax, marked confidential. Inside was a letter from Charlotte Winters and a sheaf of documents that made Alara's face go pale as she read. "What is it?" Caleb asked. "Evidence. Charlotte's husband found evidence that father's been using his shipping company to smuggle goods. High tariff items brought in without proper duties paid. It's been going on for at least 5 years, maybe longer. The lost revenue to customs is in the hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. That's federal fraud. That's enough to destroy him. If this became public, if federal prosecutors got involved, he'd face criminal charges, prison time, possibly. Definitely the loss of his business, his social standing, everything he's built." She looked up at Caleb, her eyes bright with dangerous hope. "This is it. This is the leverage we need. We'd be threatening to destroy him. He's trying to destroy us. Why should we hold back when he's already declared total war?" Her voice was fierce now, angry in a way Caleb had never heard. "He sent men to kidnap me. He's filed lawsuits designed to bankrupt you. He's trying to have you arrested on false charges. What do we owe him except the same ruthlessness he's shown us?" Caleb took the documents from her hands, reading through them carefully. The evidence was solid. Shipping manifests that didn't match customs declarations, payments to dock workers for looking the other way, coded correspondence that made the conspiracy clear. Robert Winters had done thorough work. "If we use this, there's no going back," he said quietly. "No reconciliation with your father, ever. No possibility of family peace down the line. There was never going to be reconciliation. You saw him in Denver. He doesn't want a daughter. He wants an obedient asset. I gave up on family peace the day I ran." She took the papers back. "We use this. We tell him we have it, that will go public if he doesn't drop the lawsuits and leave us alone. It's not just about us anymore, Caleb. It's about everyone watching, waiting to see if people like my father can be beaten. We have to win." She was right. Caleb knew she was right. But leveraging evidence of criminal activity felt like stepping into a different kind of war, one fought with information and blackmail rather than honest confrontation. Then again, Harrison Voss had never fought honestly a day in his life. Maybe it was time to meet him on his own terms. "We'll need to be careful how we approach this," Caleb said. "If we threaten him directly, he might call our bluff. Or worse, he might move to destroy the evidence before we can use it." "We don't threaten him directly. We go through his lawyers, professional, documented, no room for misinterpretation." Alara was already drafting the letter in her mind. "We inform Sterling and Associates that we've obtained evidence of federal crimes committed by their client. We state that we have no desire to pursue prosecution. We simply want the current lawsuits withdrawn and a guarantee of no further legal action against us. If they agree, the evidence stays private. If they don't, we turn it over to federal prosecutors and the newspapers simultaneously." That's blackmail. That's negotiation. Her smile was sharp. "Father taught me everything I know about leverage. Time to use his own lessons against him." The letter was drafted, reviewed by Judge Morrison to ensure it was legally sound, and sent to Sterling and Associates via express courier with instructions that it required a response within 7 days. Those 7 days were the longest of Caleb's life. He and Alara maintained their routines, feeding livestock, repairing fences, responding to the endless letters of support, but everything felt suspended, like they were waiting for a verdict that would determine the rest of their lives. On the 6th day, a telegram arrived. "Boss agrees to terms. Withdrawing all legal actions. Settlement documents forthcoming. Sterling and Associates." Alara read it 3 times, as if expecting the words to change. Then she looked at Caleb with an expression of stunned disbelief. He backed down. He actually backed down. He didn't have a choice, prison or pride. Not much of a decision for a man like him. "I can't believe it's over." After months of running, of fighting, of waiting for the next threat, It's just over? It's over. Caleb pulled her close, feeling his own disbelief mixing with relief. You're free, Alara. Actually free. He can't touch you anymore. She burst into tears, great heaving sobs that she'd been holding back for months. All the fear, all the stress, all the impossible pressure finally releasing in a flood of emotion. Caleb held her through it, his own eyes burning with tears he wouldn't let fall. When she finally quieted, she pulled back and wiped her face with the back of her hand. What happens to the evidence? To Father's crimes? That's up to you. We promised not to use it if he withdrew the lawsuits. He did, so we keep our word. Even though he deserves to face consequences? Even though. We're not like him, Alara. We don't destroy people just because we can. Caleb brushed hair back from her tear-streaked face. Besides, having that evidence gives us permanent insurance. If he ever comes after us again, we still have the option to use it. That's more valuable than revenge. She nodded slowly, understanding the strategic sense even if part of her wanted to see her father pay for everything he'd done. So what now? We just go back to our lives? We go back to our lives? We build our ranch? We help the people who wrote to us? We make this place into something worth the fight we put up for it. He smiled. And we do it together without looking over our shoulders for threats that aren't coming anymore. The settlement documents arrived a week later, comprehensive, legally binding, and remarkably generous. Voss agreed to drop all lawsuits, acknowledge the validity of their marriage, relinquish any claims to Alara's custody or guardianship, and establish a trust fund in her name that she could access independently. In exchange, they would maintain silence about the evidence they'd obtained and agree not to speak publicly about Harrison Voss's business practices. He's buying our silence, Alara observed, reading through the terms. He's buying peace, and we're selling it at a price that sets us up for life. Caleb pointed to the trust fund amount. That's enough to expand the ranch, hire help, weather any bad years without worry. Your father's essentially funding the life you chose over the one he wanted for you. The irony isn't lost on me, but she signed the documents without hesitation. I don't want his money for myself, but I want it for the women who wrote to us, the ones trapped like I was who need help getting out. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we use some of this money to establish a fund, a way for women in situations like mine to get financial help leaving, travel costs, legal fees, temporary housing, whatever they need to escape. Her eyes were bright with purpose now. We turn Father's guilt money into something that actually helps people. That seems like justice to me. Over the next months, that's exactly what they did. The Rourke Foundation for Women's Independence started small, advertisements in papers across the country, a post office box for requests, careful vetting to ensure the money went where it was needed. Alara managed it with the same fierce competence she brought to everything else, and Caleb watched her transform from a woman running from her past into one actively building a future. The letters of thanks that came in response to their help were more meaningful than any legal victory could have been. Women who'd left abusive marriages, daughters who'd escaped forced engagements, wives who'd found the courage to demand better treatment, each one a small victory against the system that had tried to cage Alara. You've helped more people in 6 months than most people help in a lifetime, Caleb told her one evening as she finished responding to the latest batch of requests. It's not enough. It'll never be enough as long as the laws still allow fathers to control their adult daughters, as long as women can't own property in their own names in some states, as long as... She stopped, shaking her head. I know I can't fix everything, but I can fix this small piece. That has to be enough. It's more than enough. You're amazing. She smiled, that full, genuine smile that still took his breath away when she let it show. I couldn't do any of this without you. You know that, right? Everything I am now, everything I can do, it's because you gave me a place to be brave. You were always brave. I just gave you a place to stop running long enough to remember that. Spring came to Wyoming with sudden warmth, melting snow, and bringing green back to the hills. The ranch thrived under their joint management, Caleb handling the physical labor and livestock, Alara managing finances and strategy. They'd hired 2 ranch hands to help with the expansion, good men recommended by Tom Johnson, who integrated seamlessly into the operation. The house felt alive again, filled with purpose and activity. They'd cleared out Sarah's room completely, turning it into an office for the foundation work. Alara had hesitated at first, uncertain about claiming that space, but Caleb insisted. Sarah would love what you're doing, he said. She was always helping people, always fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. This honors her memory better than keeping the room locked forever. They hosted dinner parties now. Marcus and Sarah Webb, Tom Johnson and his family, other ranchers from the territory. Alora charmed everyone with her sharp wit and genuine interest in their lives, and people who'd initially been skeptical of the Eastern Bride had become her fiercest defenders. You've built something here, Tom told Caleb one evening after dinner, watching Alora discuss cattle breeding strategies with his eldest son. Not just a marriage, a real partnership, and through it, you've helped a lot of people. That matters, Rourke. That's the kind of legacy that lasts. Couldn't have done it without her. That's the point of partnership. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. You needed each other. Turned out better for both of you than either of you could have managed alone. In June, on their official one-year anniversary, Caleb surprised Alora with the wedding dress, Sarah's wedding dress, cleaned and carefully preserved. You said you wanted a real ceremony someday. Not rushed, not out of necessity, just us, celebrating what we chose. Alora's eyes filled with tears. You remembered. I remember everything you've ever said to me. Kind of hard not to when you're the most interesting person I've ever met. They held the ceremony in the front yard at sunset, with Judge Morrison officiating and half the territory in attendance. Alora wore Sarah's dress, which fit her perfectly after minor alterations, and carried wildflowers from the meadow behind the house. Caleb wore his good suit and looked at his wife like she was the only person in the world. The vows they wrote themselves were simple and honest. Caleb promised to always value her opinions, to stand with her against any threat, to build a life where she was partner rather than property. Alora promised to trust him with her fears, to share her strengths, to make their house a home filled with purpose and love. When Morrison pronounced them married, again, officially, ceremonially, everyone cheered, and when Caleb kissed his wife, he felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years. Absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, with exactly who he was supposed to be with. The celebration lasted until midnight, neighbors bringing food and music, children running wild through the yard, adults telling stories and laughing. Alora moved through the crowd with easy grace, thanking people for coming, listening to their stories, offering advice when asked. She belonged here now, not as the Eastern Bride who'd caused such a stir, but as Alora Rourke, rancher's wife and founder of a foundation that had already helped dozens of women find freedom. When everyone finally left and they were alone in the house, Alora turned to Caleb with a smile that held no shadows, no fear, no doubt, just joy. Thank you, she said. For what? For believing I was worth the fight, for standing with me when it would have been easier to let me go, for giving me a home that's actually a home, not a prison with pretty wallpaper. She took his hands. For loving me. That's the easiest thing I've ever done. Loving you requires no effort at all. Liar. I'm difficult and stubborn, and I reorganize your tools when you're not looking. You're brilliant and fierce, and you make my life infinitely better. The tool reorganizing I can live with. She laughed and pulled him toward the stairs. Come on, husband. We have a wedding night to properly celebrate. Again. Again sounds perfect. They climbed the stairs together, leaving the traces of celebration behind, scattered dishes, extra chairs, the lingering scent of flowers and candles. Tomorrow they'd clean it all up. Tomorrow they'd return to the routines of ranch life, to the endless work of building something lasting. But tonight was theirs, a celebration of survival, of defiance, of two broken people who'd found each other in the harsh landscape and decided to build something beautiful from the ruins of their pasts. Upstairs, as Alora unpinned the wildflowers from her hair and Caleb helped with the complicated buttons on the dress, she said quietly, Do you ever wonder what your life would be like if I hadn't stepped off that stagecoach? Sometimes it would be quieter, more organized, significantly less exciting. He kissed her shoulder. And completely empty. I was surviving before you came. Now I'm living. That's not a small difference. I was running before you. Now I'm home. She turned in his arms. That's not a small difference either. They made love slowly, tenderly, taking time to appreciate every touch, every kiss, every whispered word. This wasn't the desperate urgency of their early days together, when fear and need drove them. This was something deeper, the profound intimacy of two people who knew each other completely and chose each other anyway, who'd fought together and won together and would keep fighting and winning for as long as they had. Afterward, lying tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, Alara said sleepily, "I got a letter from Charlotte Winters yesterday. Apparently my father's been seen around New York with a much humbler attitude. Fewer demands, more negotiation. Word is he's terrified someone will look too closely at his business practices." Good. Let him be terrified for a change. She also said the newspapers are calling what we did the Rourke defense, standing up to family tyranny through combination of public pressure and strategic leverage. Apparently several other women have used similar tactics to escape situations like mine. She smiled into the darkness. "We started something, Caleb. Something bigger than just us." "You started it. I just provided backup. We started it together. That's how all the best things happen. Together." They drifted towards sleep, wrapped in each other and the certainty of tomorrow. Outside, the Wyoming night settled over the ranch with its familiar sounds. Wind in the grass, cattle lowing in distant pastures, the creak of wood, and the whisper of possibility. Morning came with golden light and the smell of coffee. Alara made it the way Caleb liked, strong and hot in the tin cup with the dent. He made breakfast the way she liked, simple and efficient, nothing fancy but plenty of it. They ate together at the kitchen table, discussing the day's work, planning for the week ahead, being ordinary in the extraordinary life they'd built. A knock at the door interrupted their routine. Caleb answered to find a young woman, maybe 20, with a carpet bag and desperate eyes. "Mrs. Rourke?" she said, her voice trembling. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I wrote to your foundation last month. You sent money for a train ticket. I didn't know where else to go." Alara was already moving past Caleb, taking the girl's bag, ushering her inside. "You did exactly right coming here. You're safe now. Come in, sit down, have some coffee. Tell us what you need." As Caleb watched his wife comfort the frightened girl, offering practical help and emotional support in equal measure, he thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. How a desperate advertisement and a calculated escape had somehow transformed into purpose and partnership. How fighting for each other had taught them to fight for others. How surviving together had given them the strength to help others survive. The ranch would continue. The foundation would grow. More women would come seeking help, and they would provide it. The life they'd built through defiance and determination would expand, creating ripples that reached far beyond Wyoming territory. But at the center of it all was this. Two people who'd been brave enough to choose each other, to stand together against forces that should have overwhelmed them, to build something real and lasting from the broken pieces of their pasts. In the harsh land where survival demanded everything and promised nothing, Caleb and Alara Rourke had done more than survive. They'd built a home. They'd built a family, chosen rather than born into. They'd built a legacy of resistance that would inspire others long after they were gone. And they'd built it together, which made all the difference. Sarah Mitchell stayed for 3 weeks while they helped her establish a new identity, find work in town, and build the confidence to start over. She was the first of many who would pass through the ranch seeking refuge. Some stayed days, some stayed months. All of them left stronger than they'd arrived, carrying with them the knowledge that escape was possible, that tyranny could be defied, that freedom was worth fighting for. Years later, when people asked Alara about those early days, about running from New York, about marrying a stranger, about standing up to her father's empire, she would smile and say simply, "I stopped running when I found something worth standing for, and someone worth standing with." Everything else followed from that. And Caleb, when asked how he'd managed to help so many women find freedom, would shrug and say, "I didn't do much. I just gave my wife the space to be who she always was, brilliant, fierce, and unbreakable. She did the rest herself." But the truth, as they both knew, was more complex and more simple than either explanation. They'd saved each other. They'd built each other up. They'd fought together and won together and created something from nothing through sheer stubborn refusal to surrender. In the end, that's what love was. Not the easy romance of storybooks, but the hard-won partnership of two people who chose each other every day, who fought for each other and with each other, who built something lasting from the raw materials of hope and determination and mutual respect. The ranch thrived. The foundation grew. The letters kept coming, and they kept answering. And in the house that had once been a monument to grief, life bloomed again, loud and messy and absolutely perfect. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and they sat together on the porch watching the sun set over land they'd defended and built and made their own, Caleb would sometimes ask, "Any regrets?" And Alara would always answer the same way, "Not a single one. You?" "Not one." And that was the truth. Simple, complete, unshakable. In the harsh land of Holt's Crossing, two people had found each other and built something unbreakable. They'd faced down tyranny and won. They'd turned survival into triumph, necessity into purpose, fear into fierce determination. They'd done it together. And together, they would face whatever came next, not with certainty of victory, but with absolute certainty of partnership. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.